The world began to collapse and giant monsters emerged from the flames, destroying everything in their path. At the moment when everything was falling apart, the white-haired wizard appeared to save the world. Fire waves and lava streams were exploding at his feet, but he didn't back down. He used magical power that was draining his life. Dark magical circles appeared around him, feeding on his blood, which he used as a key for black magic to face the terrifying power of the monsters. He was using dark and forbidden magic, but he used it to protect humanity. He didn't resort to the power of the living, but summoned the power of the dead. From the depths of the earth came bodies that had died long ago, transformed into warriors fighting in the name of the living. In the midst of the disaster, the wizard helped humanity endure. After a long battle, the dragon collapsed under the weight of the dark magic, but the ending wasn't happy. At first, people glorified him and considered him their savior, to the point where they celebrated his victory. But before he died, the greedy rulers turned against him. They led him to the guillotine to cut off his head in front of everyone. Before his death, he smiled a painful smile and said his curse would change the world. The blade fell and the stage was drenched in his innocent blood, and the hero disappeared from life. Despite this, peace spread across the land. 100 years passed. In a quiet village called Molin in the mountains, everything was peaceful. Dense forests surrounded the village, and life went on quietly. In the fields, flowers were blooming, and water moistened their leaves. Louis was lying on the grass under the sun with his hair sparkling in the light, asking Violet what she was doing in his house. Violet with a calm smile said she was watering the flowers, but her water also fell on Louis's face as he tried to dodge it nervously, asking her why she was dropping water on his face. But the scene shifts to the village, people walking in the streets, knights and small dwarves moving through the crowd, and children running with dogs. In this atmosphere, Louis was sitting in a tavern. The tavern owner served him a plate, and all the customers were watching him in amazement at his beauty. The girls were mesmerized. The tavern owner handed him the food with an embarrassed smile and asked if he liked the food. Louis responded positively, and after a while, he started telling him a secret that there was a plague that spread in a nearby village. The tavern owner was worried about his friend, who no longer responded, and that he had never seen him sick before. After a moment of silence, his eyes widened as he whispered fearfully, "This might be because of the hero's curse." Louis replied dismissively that he wasn't convinced. The tavern owner told him that nevertheless, the place here was different from usual. Louis replied, asking if this was because of the plague. The tavern owner spread his hands and said that what spread wasn't a disease plague, it was a plague of love for Lord Louis. Louis put his hand on his face in annoyance, unable to stand hearing this talk, and told the tavern owner that if he continued this talk, he would leave the place and go. While Louis was eating his food, a girl with elf-like ears appeared and asked him if he was sitting here alone, and asked him to join her and her duelist friend who was sitting at the other table because she was impressed by him. The duelist waved shyly, and the girl continued that it was the first time her duelist friend liked someone, asking if he'd like to come drink something with them. But Louis' reaction was shocking. He asked them, "How much will you pay me?" They were shocked by his words, but he clarified that his presence in the tavern and eating there was paid for. He continued sarcastically that even the girl's annoying appearance required effort for Louis to tolerate, so he wanted to know how much they would pay him. The girl apologized and at the same time didn't know how she wasn't upset by what he said, even though she had the courage to talk to him, but now she wanted to disappear from in front of him by any means. Without warning, the girl got confused and quickly apologized, leaving embarrassed with her face red even though she was insulted. Her friend quickly followed her. Louis continued eating in annoyance, telling himself that he was tired of being this handsome and felt he was mean to the girl. In his imagination, he remembered a former girl who accused him of playing with her feelings and that he was winking at her, holding a knife and screaming at him angrily, while he was terrified, explaining to her that all that happened was that he was cleaning dust from his eye. Even though the incidents he went through before were painful, Louis continued to shine as usual because of his handsomeness. He raised his face to the light with a smile and said to himself that being handsome was very enjoyable, and that the most beautiful thing in his life was being handsome. Every time he sat in the tavern, girls and men all looked at him with admiring glances, as if they were enchanted by his presence. People wanted to know even what he was wearing, and when he entered a store to try on clothes, you'd find village residents standing peeking through the windows. As soon as he bought an outfit, you'd find other people imitating him and buying exactly like his. Someone even bragged that he bought the same dagger he had. One day, while walking in the street, one of the young men approached him respectfully and asked to greet him, saying this was his biggest dream. Behind them, a girl laughed hesitantly and said she wanted to as well, but Louis refused everyone. The young man fell to the ground holding his leg and crying, and Louis yelled at him to leave him alone. At that moment, he heard the voice of the duelist he had seen in the tavern before. She was standing behind him telling him his life was really exciting. She stood in front of him confidently, smiled sarcastically, and told him he was a strange and interesting person, even refusing an invitation from the capital. She told him he might be stupid for doing that, but this makes your popularity increase even more. Louis looked at her calmly without responding. She tried to get past what happened before, invited him to drink with her, and extended her hand, but as he turned his face away, he asked her coldly, "Who are you? Are you here to greet me too?" "I don't want to greet anyone right now. Make it next time." The girl was shocked, and her eyes widened in surprise. Her friend opened her lips in disbelief at what she heard. The duelist felt insulted. Her face changed to anger, and she said he wouldn't forget what happened. She suddenly laughed loudly, and smiled a smile full of hatred. She extended her hand to her sword from the sheath, saying that he chose this. But suddenly, a heavy hand fell on her shoulder. She turned around cursing and threatening to kill whoever touched her, only to find the big girl who wanted to greet Louis, her eyes full of anger, saying that the only one who could kill her was Louis. The duelist stood shocked and scared. The girl threatened her and told her to leave Louis alone and go because Louis was the man of her dreams and no one would touch him. Her look was cold and scary to the point that the duelist retreated in fear, with her friends behind her. As she moved away, she said while gritting her teeth that if Louis wasn't hers, he wouldn't be anyone else's. After they left, Louis thanked the girl who helped him and asked her how much weight she could lift. She replied sarcastically that a lady shouldn't be asked that question. Louis was satisfied with a cold look, and the incident ended. Days passed until night came. The moon rose, and two mysterious men sneaked toward Louis's house. They stood watching through the window at Louis sleeping. One of them said he was handsome, but they were more handsome than him. The other agreed. One asked, "If we kill him, will the girls date us?" The girl agreed to this. This girl turned out to be the duelist who had threatened Louis before. The girl with her had a tense face. She and her friend tried to stop her and told her to drop the matter, but she insisted, saying if they wouldn't help her, they should leave, and continued that, if she couldn't have him, she would kill him. Then she laughed and said they wanted to finish quickly, but suddenly, everything turned upside down. The men she had brought to kill Louis fell dead, and looking behind her, she found her friends had lost consciousness. Before she could comprehend, she found a sharp knife at her neck. The one who did this was Violet standing behind her, asking the duelist if she was the one who planned all this. The duelist froze in terror, asking herself what kind of speed this was. How couldn't she sense her presence? Is there someone with such skill in the village? She asked who she was and why she was doing this to her, but suddenly she froze in fear and realized that the one behind her was Violet, asking her again fearfully why she was doing this to her. Violet pulled her hair cruelly, making the girl scream in pain, and yelled at her angrily that flowers are made to be seen, and how someone like her tries to pluck a flower. Her eyes were crazy, and her voice was full of hatred. Violet raised her knife above the duelist's head and told her that in her next life, she should watch flowers from afar and not try to pluck them. The duelist screamed for help, but it was too late. Her final scream was lost in the night, and Louis slept in his bed without feeling anything. Dawn broke again. Louis came out of his house and saw Violet greeting him with a calm smile, saying good morning and telling her she was up early. Then he called to her and asked about the flowers and why she was watering them again today when she had watered them yesterday. She told him they almost died yesterday. Under the grass, a dead hand buried was the only sign of what happened at night. He asked her when she would go to the village again. What if they ran out of money? She replied that if he felt bored, why didn't he look for work as a hobby? He replied that he didn't want that, it was tiring. Louis was very happy lying on the ground, saying he would live the next 10 or 20 years in complete happiness and bliss because of his handsomeness, but he didn't know what awaited him. Days passed until a stormy day came. Louis went to the tavern, but he was surprised that the place was full of sick people lying on the ground, some dying and some screaming in pain. Then, he remembered the old tavern owner's words about the plague that hit the neighboring village. Worry overwhelmed him as he wondered, had the plague really reached here? After a while, Louis was lying on his bed, his whole body covered with sores and fever burning him. He turned to Violet with a weak voice and told her that everything was wasted. Her tears flooded her eyes as she sat beside him crying. He told her bitterly that he was still young and handsome and could have lived and shown his beauty more until he grew old and died. His voice broke, and his eyes filled with sad tears. He whispered that he didn't deserve to die this way, but he couldn't resist. His eyes closed slowly, and his consciousness began to disappear while he was still clinging to his desire to live. Violet screamed at the top of her voice, calling Louis, trying desperately to make him open his eyes again, but he had already sunk into darkness. He asked himself, am I really dead? He was thinking about the time that passed while he was unconscious. Suddenly, a strange window appeared in front of him, like a magical system, saying he was involved in dark magic, and that his special ability was resistance to death. He wondered in his mind, is this just a dream? He opened his eyes and saw the treetops and the night filled with stars, and the full moon right in front of his face. He held his head while complaining of a headache, got up from the ground and screamed, "What is this stupid dream?" He stretched his arms and confidently said it was impossible for him to die. He pulled out his dagger and looked at it like a mirror to see his beauty, but what appeared to him was a terrifying skull, and his hand itself had turned to bone. He stayed quiet for a while, then with a trembling voice asked, "Who is this?" And the moment he grasped the truth, he screamed and fell to his knees. He had become a skeleton. The dagger fell from his hand as he screamed, and the system wrote in front of him, "Skeleton Louis, level, first, profession, nothing, title, the bastard, health, 100, magic energy, 0, strength, 1, endurance, 1, agility, 1, intelligence, 0. In another place, an army of high-ranking knights was crawling across burnt ground to take control of a dark dungeon. Red banners were raised, and the sound of iron and swords filled the place. After a fierce battle, they managed to destroy the dungeon. But what emerged from within was more terrible than anything they had imagined. The black dragon Aatrox, Lord of Shadows. Every breath it took set the earth ablaze, and the knights themselves began trembling with terror. But the surprise was that Louis was standing in front of the dragon, laughing as he petted its head. The dragon looked at him with strange, loyal gazes, and even became shy and puffed steam from its nostrils, while lying like a small puppy in front of him. The knights were shocked and couldn't believe what they were seeing. Their leader said the matter was worth every penny, and that he thought it was impossible, and admitted that in his entire life as a hunter, he had never seen a scene like this, and that even the highest levels of magic wouldn't do this. This wasn't magic. This was something deeper and greater. The leader said sarcastically that this was all because of his handsomeness, and the knights exchanged glances in amazement, and that being handsome was something special. Louis himself remembered that all he needed to do was show his face, and that was enough to bring him glory and money like any great mercenary. But the reality was the opposite. Louis returned to reality as a skeleton, thrown on the ground after a goblin kicked him with his leg. In front of him were 3 goblins looking at him with contempt and asking him what he was doing here. One of them spat on his skull. Louis stood up with a nervous smile, but when he saw they weren't leaving him alone, he ran while screaming, "Is it possible I'm really a skeleton? This must be a dream. And if it's not a dream, how are there goblins chasing after him?" He kept running with them behind him, then suddenly stopped and told himself he was the great Louis. How could he be afraid of trivial goblins? He raised his sword with determination and said he would survive somehow, and that even if he was weak in combat, facing 1 or 2 goblins was easy. But before he could finish his words, one of the goblins' clubs came down on his skull, and he flew through the air and his bones broke. He fell to the ground screaming, "Wait, those are my bones!" But they kept kicking and humiliating him as he tried to cover his skull with his hands. In his imagination, he pictured himself in front of the goblins, and they were nervous, because he was surrounded by great skeletal heroes standing behind him, and the goblins were shaking with fear. But he returned to reality in pain on the ground, and the goblins didn't care about his screaming. Suddenly, a strong light pierced through the forest and descended on one of them and knocked him down. A tall knight appeared, ran quickly, and struck the rest with his sword. When Louis regained consciousness, he opened his eyes to find 2 girls standing with the tall knight beside him, and the knights had finished off the goblins. One of the girls said, "It seems they were too late," the knight said sadly in his voice. "They ate him without leaving even a single piece," and described the demons as cruel. Louis lay beside them on the ground without moving. One of the girls, who was wearing a nun's outfit, said, "This is the world, survival of the fittest." They were all about to burst into tears as they looked at Louis' skeleton. Louis thought he couldn't get up from the intensity of the pain. A girl wearing a monk's outfit offered to accompany him to honor the memory of the dead. However, Louis got up from the ground and said embarrassedly that he survived thanks to them. He waved his hand, trying to calm the worried travelers, but this didn't make them happy at all. They started screaming loudly when Louis' skeleton offered them a snack together as thanks. One of the travelers screamed loudly, and in the next moment, Louis' head flew off due to a sharp sword strike. The travelers screamed that they had never heard of skeletons that talk, so he must be a demon. They screamed that they needed to warn the villagers quickly. The travelers fled quickly from the area, while Louis' head lay on the ground. The main character mentioned people and monsters in his speech, and wondered how he ended up there. His severed head lay on the ground, and he said he needed to go home first. By the time the main character reached the village, it was early morning, but what he saw didn't please him at all. because instead of the village there were only ruins. He thought with horror about what happened to the village. Louis wondered if that was really because of the plague. Louis looked around and saw that his house had deteriorated. He wondered why the flowers had withered. Louis said that Violet's house was still the same. He looked around his girlfriend's house, which hadn't really changed during the time he was away. The main character was silent for a few seconds, trying to understand what was happening. He slowly opened the door of Violet's house, looked inside and asked in surprise, "Is it really open here?" Louis said with displeasure that there was a smell of alcohol. He asked cautiously, "Does anyone live here?" Louis said, "Violet doesn't drink at this time." A pair of evil eyes emerged behind him. Violet was holding her favorite knife in her hand and immediately attacked Louis, using it with one quick strike that pierced the skeleton's arm, scaring him so much that Louis started screaming again. He asked, "Is this really Violet?" Violet was clearly drunk, still flushed, and her face looked dissatisfied. Louis wondered, why does she look like this? He thought she was really bad, but at the same moment Violet hit the poor skeleton on his head with one quick movement. Louis screamed and flew backward and hit the wall behind him. He continued screaming loudly while one of his hands stuck on Violet's knife was dangling and moving. Violet stood with her face down for a few more seconds, then threw the hand back. The main character was terrified, thinking that Violet wouldn't recognize him at all. He wondered without understanding why she was suddenly angry at him. Violet brought her knife to her face, and her face became darker with anger. Louis couldn't figure out what happened during his absence. He got up from the ground and asked Violet to stop, but she clearly wasn't planning to do that, and just walked forward, heading toward the defenseless skeleton. In the blink of an eye, Violet disappeared from her place, which surprised Louis greatly. She found herself behind him, asking who he was. Violet pressed out of habit with her knife on the skeleton's throat, as she stood behind him, and asked him why the monster was acting like a human, and why he was pretending they knew each other. There was tension in the room, and Violet didn't let Louis get out of her arms. The main character screamed as he turned to Violet, saying it was him. He screamed that he was Louis. Violet's eyes widened in shock, and she froze for a second trying to understand this. The main character said that he himself didn't know why he had turned into a skeleton. Violet lowered her knife, and Louis said he had suddenly woken up. But this was just the calm before the storm, and in the next second, Violet grabbed Louis again and threw him to the ground. The main character screamed in pain again, while Violet overwhelmed him with anger. Louis got up from the ground trembling with pain, but as soon as he did, Violet put her hand on his skull, and immediately, with a shock movement, sat on top of the main character's skeleton, waving her knife as she held Louis by his skull, and asked angrily how he dared to imitate the main character. Her eyes became wild with anger, and she screamed that she would grind him to dust. Louis screamed desperately, asking her to wait, trying to explain to her that it was him. Violet's hand continued to rest on his skull, and her knife was already moving toward his skull when Louis screamed that he was the same flower. Violet's knife stopped a few centimeters above the hero's skull, and she looked at him with shock in her eyes. Memories of the past immediately passed through her head, where Louis asked her why she called him flower. Violet answered with a laugh that it was because flowers were fragrant. The main character got up from the ground with a dissatisfied and wet face, because Violet had poured water on him and called him flower. Louis turned to Violet and asked her why she called him flower. Louis asked if it was because of the clothes. Violet agreed with him, then said with a smile that he was beautiful like a flower. She laughed while closing her eyes. Violet said this was a nickname. Water drops fell on Louis's face and he said with a smile that it wasn't that bad. Violet returned to reality, TC Rav. She was sobbing and her tears flowed and dripped on Louis's skull that was lying beneath her. It turned out that Louis noticed this. He turned to face her as he turned to Violet with concern. Violet asked with tears if this was true. Tears flowed from her eyes when she asked Louis again if it was really him. She said she missed him so much. The dawn sunlight pierced the room, and Violet hugged Louis's skeleton, who was still lying on the ground. After a while, when Violet calmed down, she began telling Louis that a lot had changed in a year. The main character said in frustration that he had been dead for a whole year. He raised his head up, then asked Violet why she was talking this way. Violet sat all this time with her back to the main character, then answered embarrassedly that she was still trying to get used to it. This was very painful for Louis, and he began to cry. Violet said that a demon had suddenly appeared. Louis turned in surprise, screaming, "What kind of demon?" Violet explained to him that a war had started because of demons, and some kingdoms had already entered it. However, Violet said she simply couldn't leave this place full of his memories, then said he appeared after that. They continued sitting with their backs to each other, and Louis said understandingly that this was why there were goblins near the village. Then, the main character called Violet and asked her if he could return to his previous appearance. Now he was just a skeleton, a shadow of his former self. Violet asked him not to worry. She turned with a cheerful smile and said she knew. There was warmth in her gaze as she continued saying she knew how to return him to his old face. face. Louis looked at her in surprise, waiting for what she would say next. After a while, the main character was already standing on the edge of the cliff, with Violet standing behind him. Louis told her he would do anything to become what he used to be. He looked down from the cliff, then continued, saying it might be dangerous, and asked her if she would follow him. The main character looked tragically down from the cliff, as if preparing to jump. Violet clasped her hands and agreed. She said her job was to take care of the most beautiful flowers, and a smile was drawn on her face as she spoke about it. Louis said in that case they would set off searching for his beauty. Finally, they began moving forward, while smiling. Violet followed him. With the help of a regeneration potion that heals all wounds instantly, as well as red spider claws, blue lizard tail, and green deer blood, the main character pointed her blade upward in front of her as she addressed what was facing her and said this was her final ingredient. Facing her was a huge monster, the king of the lake, named Leviathan. Leviathan was massive, towering over Louis with his mouth wide open and his eyes glowing as he looked at the main character. Louis looked at him confidently from below, then commanded Leviathan to come to him. After that, he described him as an ugly creature with a fish face. Leviathan looked at him in amazement, with wide eyes and an open mouth as he wondered to himself. Then he thought in amazement about this crazy man. As he contemplated carefully, Leviathan thought he could kill him with just a little finger. At that moment, the hero was waving his hands carelessly. Leviathan looked at him wondering what he even wanted, while the hero opened his mouth smiling and asked him if he was scared. Leviathan gave him a threatening look and frowned, then let out an angry howl and opened his mouth wide and began approaching Louis, who was running away from him. The hero started running away, screaming that he had caught him. Then he raised his head up and screamed loudly, and at that moment Violet, who was carrying a dagger in her hand, jumped from a nearby slope and headed toward Leviathan. At the same time, Louis jumped away from Leviathan. Violet advanced toward his neck with sharp knives in her hand, while Leviathan's face showed features of amazement. Then he turned toward her, realizing that the skeleton had tricked him, so his mouth opened in amazement, and he looked at her in shock as she approached him. And after a moment, blood rushed to flood the place around them. The hero stood with Violet after eliminating Leviathan among many trees with petals white as snow. Violet extended a container toward Louis, so he reached out to receive it. The container was filled with red liquid, a regeneration elixir, possessing mysterious healing power from heavenly light capable of healing wounds. The hero raised his head in amazement and asked if this worked in this place. Violet raised her head, smiling, and answered him positively, adding that he should be where cherry blossoms bloom. Then Louis pointed the container toward his hand, suggesting trying it, but Violet quickly put her hand in front of him and asked him to wait. Then with a sharp movement of her dagger, made a small cut in her hand, and blood flowed from it. The hero opened his mouth in amazement and asked her what she was doing, but Violet, with calm features, held the container and said she would try it on herself first as a precautionary measure. Drops of the elixir began falling on the wound in her palm, and suddenly a girl with large wings appeared in the sky and extended her hands toward Violet. Louis was watching the scene amazed, his eyes wide and mouth open, his body tense. He screamed loudly in amazement as he looked at this. Then Violet smiled and placed the elixir bottle on Louis's extended hand and said his turn had come. He took a confused breath, then grabbed the container and looked at it carefully. He called Violet by her name, so she asked him joyfully what he wanted. He answered that without her he would be nothing, and thanked her sincerely with those words. Violet saw him as if he were handsome Louis. Violet opened her eyes and mouth wide in great amazement as she stared at him. Meanwhile, Louis pulled the cork from the container and raised it high, remembering what happened to him, saying that everything was over, that miserable life had come to an end. Tears poured from his empty skull as he repeated that if he returned he would live as a true promise. Then he screamed angrily, and broke the container over his head so the elixir spilled completely on him. A thick green liquid spread on the ground under the cherry trees, and bone fragments and leather gloves that Louis had been wearing moments before appeared in the middle of it. Violet stood next to him with terrified features, screaming his name, while he made painful sounds as he raised melting bones in his hand, wondering fearfully what was happening. The sky above them thickened and turned dark purple, and the wind scattered the white cherry petals away. Violet lowered her eyebrows sadly as she looked ahead. Meanwhile, the hero used the last of his strength to slam his skull on the ground and continued hitting his head violently despite Violet's pleas for him to calm down. He turned to her asking why he should calm down, asking why he didn't return to what he was. And in front of his bone fragments floating in the green liquid, he wondered if he would stay like this forever and why the elixir didn't work. Then he raised his head toward the sky angrily, wondering about the reason. He knelt before Violet, wondering if he would never become human again. Violet stood facing him with a face full of worry and her hands on her chest. Then he said he no longer had a reason to live, and coldly suggested that his death might be better. Violet's lips trembled from intense emotion, but she smiled sadly and moved toward him, saying there might be another way. Suddenly, a huge explosion sounded behind her at a close distance, thick dust rising from it. Violet turned in amazement toward its source, while Louis covered his face with his hands so as not to inhale the dust. Violet quickly drew her daggers as she looked ahead and asked Louis to run away as fast as possible. But the hero, in amazement, wondered what was going on. Then a creature with red hair and one horn appeared before them, his eyes red and bloody with narrow yellow pupils, and his fangs like sharp knives. His aura clearly indicated he was the king of demons. The huge demon king with his wide wings approached them quickly. Violet turned to Louis and asked him to run while she tried to buy time. But the hero ignored her words and headed carelessly toward the demon king, wondering about how strong he was if he was a king among demons. Violet tried to stop him with hand signals, but he advanced steadily toward the demon queen, asking her to do him a favor. After that, he opened his mouth wide and made one single request: that she kill him. The demon queen looked at him with focus and noticed that this disgusting creature was asking for death while he was basically already dead. She considered the matter extremely interesting and analyzed it, saying he was not completely alive nor completely dead, making him an unprecedented creature. She licked her lips with a demonic smile and told him she would do what he asked and kill him. She extended her hand toward him carefully, while the hero confirmed within himself that he had had enough, and that if he couldn't return to what he was, death was better for him. He looked in terror at the demon queen's hand as it approached him. Suddenly, Violet appeared between him and her hand and asked for forgiveness. Louis looked at her in shock with his mouth open and asked her confusedly what she was doing. With a sharp movement, Violet pushed him away several meters, then smiled at him and told him her only wish, that he stay alive. She reminded him that there were people in the world who were still ready to protect him. Then she smiled at him tenderly before turning with focus toward the demon queen, who was staring at her with interest. The two began approaching each other with fiery looks. Violet stood with her dagger extended in front of her, while the demon queen prepared her sharp claws for battle. With a quick movement, Violet surprised her opponent and struck her in the chest, then moved lightly around her while her eyes gleamed with swords. The demon queen let out a gasp of amazement, and a small wound appeared at her collarbone. She placed her hand confused on the wound site and stared at her palm stained with her blood, then smiled a wide smile and let out an evil laugh, raising her wings and arms high, declaring that she would fight with her full strength. Then her eye gleamed with bright light as she activated the power of Lucifer's eye. She launched into the sky using Lucifer's eye and began concentrating huge magical energy in her palm. Violet raised her head tiredly with her face tense and realized she was fast and that she was forced to defend. She took a fighting stance with her dagger in front of her, but the demon queen suddenly attacked her with a swift strike using her claws, easily cutting Violet's sword and slashing her chest. She said, with a savage look, that Lucifer's eye reveals the essence of everything, and therefore she couldn't defend herself. Then she prepared for a new attack with greater magical energy. After a moment, a magical energy explosion sounded high above the cherry trees, and crimson blood stained the ground. A drop of blood ran down the demon queen's face, so she licked it with her tongue, smiling, saying she didn't expect this strike. Not only did she dodge the blow, but also hit her opponent at the same time. She addressed Violet, saying she impressed her, then called her as if she were just a weak human. Violet looked at her with one eye, as the other was injured. The demon queen smiled and said she should become her servant, then wondered why a strong human like her would risk her life for a half-dead skeleton. Violet caught her breath with difficulty, then smiled confidently, saying she promised to water the flowers. Then she added with a sarcastic smile that a bloodthirsty demoness wouldn't understand the feeling of losing someone dear. The demon queen looked at her in amazement and said her words reminded her of something she was trying to forget. Then suddenly her eyes widened and her mouth opened as she declared she would die. Violet closed her eyes in resignation, preparing for her fate, but suddenly a strong scream rang out. No! Violet opened her eyes wide in amazement to see Louis standing in front of her, protecting her with his body, his dagger extended. She was confused and asked him fearfully why he came back. He answered while staring ahead sharply that he didn't know, then shouted, saying he had nothing left to lose. The demon queen looked tiredly, placing her hand on her forehead, and sighed deeply, then wondered about this color, before a bright golden light covered her face, forcing her to block her sight with her hand. She contemplated the scene with great interest and said in amazement that she saw his truth through Lucifer's eye, and wondered admiringly, is this what he really is? And she saw Louis in his former form, an extremely handsome young man with golden hair, in the Demon King's castle, which was a huge floating rock with a palace in the center submerged in complete darkness. One of the huge muscular demons got angry and screamed that this was impossible, then asked angrily, how could a demon refuse to kill? He tensed his whole body and screamed that this was madness. A small demon addressed him saying he was just a guard and asked him to calm down, and another short demon joined to calm him down. Suddenly a goose wearing a suit with 2 small horns approached them. He frowned and asked what was going on. The guard looked at him confused and called him elder, and explained that he didn't understand why the queen refused to tear apart humans, and that they had seen everything through the crystal. Then the elder knitted his eyebrows and said seriously, that's because the demon queen has given her heart to a man. The guard asked in amazement, how is this possible? Then the sheikh asked him to look around. The guard looked at a brick wall that had many pictures of Louis hanging on it from when he was young. The sheikh explained that all of this was dedicated to a man named Louis. The guard wondered if this was some kind of magic, so the sheikh answered him with annoyance in the negative and called him a fool, then waved his wing as he moved away, explaining that in his homeland this is called demonic behavior. After a brief silence, he clarified that this behavior is known as fandom. At that moment, the demon queen rushed quickly toward Louis, then threw herself into his arms. Louis and Violet were watching this with great amazement. Heavy tears flowed from the eyes of the demon queen, who seemed extremely happy, screaming that she had missed him so much. The hero remained stunned while she hugged his skeleton tightly. For long centuries there had been only 10 demon kings, and the best of them was the black dragon Aatrox. Among the demons there was a belief that his presence meant that humanity's destruction was just a matter of time. And now, Aatrox, with her flowing tears and open lips, screamed to Louis that she had really wished to see him. The hero asked her in confusion, what do you mean? Aatrox wiped her tears with a sad face and said, so this is what happened to him. Then she looked at the ground sadly, and indicated that it must have been very difficult for him. After that she asked him how he ended up in this ugly, useless, skeletal body. Then Violet's eyes widened in amazement, and she pressed her lips together while staring at Louis. The hero looked carefully at Aatrox and said to himself, here is the demon queen. Aatrox put her hands on her stomach and asked him if this meant he was looking for a way to get his body back. Then she looked shyly at the ground and asked him not to worry, and enthusiastically confirmed that she would accompany him and help him restore his beautiful body. Violet screamed angrily that she couldn't be trusted, then reminded him that she was a demon. The hero extended his hand in front of Violet to dissuade her from confrontation, then turned to Aatrox and asked her if she wanted to help him restore his body. She answered positively, then raised her fist and pointed with 2 fingers from her hand, explaining that the reason was that the human world was full of dangers, and she continued and looked at Violet and said that this human was too weak to protect him. Violet glared at her angrily and frowned and asked her what she meant, then confidently declared while stepping on the ground that she was the flower protector here, and that Louis was the one who protected her. She put her hand on her chest with pride, looking at Aatrox defiantly. The hero kept watching the argument between the 2 girls in confusion, while Aatrox clenched her jaw angrily, and veins appeared on her face from the intensity of her emotion. She screamed not to make her laugh, then turned toward Violet in confusion and tears, and asked her, then why did you let Louis die? And asked her to answer. Violet was confused and didn't know what to say, so she cut off her words and was unable to respond. Then Aatrox turned to Louis and said she realized he was still having trouble trusting her. Then she caressed her hair with a seductive look and asked him, what if he became her master and signed a contract with her? Louis looked at her in amazement and asked, a contract? Then Violet exploded in anger and said indignantly that she was addressing her master. After a short period, when the clear skylight filled a forest clearing, a rabbit appeared, carrying a large carrot in its mouth, jumping merrily. Suddenly, a huge thunderous explosion occurred that lit the horizon with magical energy that rose kilometers into the sky, spreading a shockwave that destroyed everything around it. Even the rabbit very far from the explosion center was thrown to the ground, and the carrot flew from its mouth. Amid the destruction appeared a document written on an old scroll, and it was a contract with a demon, written in it that life was the stake. According to this contract, Aatrox agreed to follow Louis until he regained his previous form, and the penalty for violating it was soul destruction. It was written in the contract that the first party was Louis and the second party was Aatrox, the black dragon. Then Aatrox smiled a wide smile and clasped her fists to her chest with joy and said enthusiastically that the contract had been concluded and that she would do everything necessary to help him. At that moment, the hero was looking at her coldly, holding the document in his hands. Violet stood behind him, trembling from the intensity of anger she felt, while the hero answered positively, then asked her about her name. Aatrox smiled, a wide smile as she approached him, and told him that her name was the Black Dragon Aatrox. The hero put his hand on his skull and repeated, the Black Dragon, then noticed that the name was long and difficult to call, so he suggested giving her a new name. Aatrox looked at him in amazement, putting her hand on her waist, and asked him again, "A new name?" Louis thought a little, putting his hand on his chin, then spoke audibly about her being a demon, but also a good dragon who helped him. He told her he would call her Dracony. Atrox raised her eyebrow in amazement and repeated the name, Dracony? She knew well that dragon names passed from generation to generation. She looked with displeasure at her feet, and bit her lips with her teeth, and her body trembled from the intensity of her feelings, then said slowly, "Good, dragon." After that, she raised her face and her cheeks had reddened and screamed shyly, "What a cute name." She jumped with joy and turned to Louis, saying he was the best. The hero looked at her smiling and asked her what they would do now. Violet watched the scene silently without speaking. After a while, they reached a new area, which was a desert, where a small lizard was holding its tail in its hands, fleeing from a scorpion. Violet pointed with her finger and asked Louis to look, then told him they were approaching the village. Atrox and the hero were walking behind her, and all of them were wearing long robes with hoods suitable for the desert environment. Louis screamed with a miserable face, complaining about the intense heat, with sweat dripping profusely from his skull, and said tiredly that he was dying. Violet approached him from behind with concern, and asked him what was wrong. He answered her to see for herself, then told her he didn't feel well. Violet looked at Atrox, who was walking in front of them, then asked Louis if it was good that she accompanied them. Louis looked at Atrox's back while Violet said that demons were creatures that hunted humans for entertainment, and no one knew what was going through her mind. At that moment, Atrox was walking exhausted with her face covered in sweat, and wondered to herself, "What hell is this?" Violet turned to Louis and told him she was just worried about them traveling with a demon. Louis raised his hand toward her face and suddenly tapped her forehead with his finger, leaving a small scratch that made her close her eyes in pain. He called her by name and told her to listen. He told her he didn't care if she was human or demon. What mattered was that she would help him restore his body. He added that since he became a skeleton, he had been living every day in hell. Then he explained that he knew she was worried about him, but he asked her not to worry. At that moment, the small lizard had escaped from the scorpion after taking refuge with a larger lizard that defended it, so the scorpion stopped its chase. The hero looked carefully at Violet and asked her if she was here to help him, and before she could answer, he told her that if that was the case, then there was no need to worry about trivial matters. After that, he enthusiastically called her to continue walking. Violet looked ahead with wide eyes and confusion overwhelming her, and asked herself, how could she be so rude, and remembered that he had always helped her. But she thought, what if she couldn't trust Louis? While thinking about this, the hero kicked a small animal on the sand with a sly smile and asked them how they dared to obstruct his path. Violet smiled while staring at her closed fist and asked herself, who would believe him? Then she remembered Atrox's anger when she asked her why he was dead. Then she swore to herself that she wouldn't let him die again, and confidently confirmed that she would protect him as she protects flowers. At that time, Louis was putting the hood on his skull and thinking indifferently that he wished he could find his beautiful face quickly. After a short time, they reached a large rock with a cave inside it, with 2 guards with spears at its entrance. This cave was known as Arenos, and inside it was a small city. The city was lit thanks to cracks in the rocks that allowed sunlight or moonlight to enter. The city consisted of sandy houses of different sizes, and people were walking through its streets. Atrox stood covering her head with her hood next to an old man begging for money, while Violet was passing near 2 men with criminal features who looked at her with threatening glances. As for Louis, he was walking lightly in the street waving his arms. Violet turned to him warningly and told him the place was dangerous, and asked him to stay close to her. Atrox mocked her words with a smile, saying she knew the place was dangerous, and yet brought Louis here. Then Atrox stuck to Louis and told him to stay with her and that she would protect him. The hero moved away from her, asking her not to get close to him, justifying that it was already hot here. Then Violet said with annoyance that they hadn't come to this place in vain, but searching for Louis's body, then screamed in her face to think about her words. The hero went forward and told Violet he knew he could depend on her, then asked her if she had a plan. Violet smiled and thanked him for trusting her. At that moment, Atrox extended her hands longingly toward Louis, who had left her behind, so Violet turned to her with wild eyes and a mocking smile. Atrox's face immediately distorted, her veins swelled, her eyes turned a bright blood-red color, and she stared at her angrily screaming, asking if she was trying to provoke her. Atrox rushed angrily, asking her to come to her, while Violet didn't respond to her provocation and just stuck out her tongue mockingly. As for the hero, he didn't notice anything happening behind him, but continued walking forward, humming a simple tune. After a short time, they reached a building with a sign in front of it, indicating it was a tavern. They entered inside, and Louis yawned, tiredly putting his hand on his chest, then noticed that time was late, and suggested they rest. He explained that he had rented 2 rooms. Violet and Aatrox looked at him in confusion while he headed to one of the rooms, so Aatrox immediately ran after him. The hero raised his hands, bidding the others farewell until tomorrow, and entered the room, while Violet followed Aatrox with angry looks as she chased Louis. The hero turned to Aatrox in amazement and asked her what she wanted. She raised her head toward him with tearful eyes, and said he had rented 2 rooms, then asked him to allow her to stay with him. Violet approached angrily and asked her violently about her intentions, then screamed asking her why she was pressuring him, and she declared in front of Louis that she would sleep with him. Then Aatrox grabbed Violet's hair tightly and pulled it back, ordering her to stop, then screamed that she was the one who would sleep with him. Violet looked at her with anger in her eyes and asked her how she could allow a demon to stay with him. Meanwhile, the hero quietly entered the room and closed the door behind him, leaving the 2 girls sighing sadly. After a while, the 2 sat in another room facing each other. Aatrox began cursing at Violet and asking her to leave, so Violet replied, pleading not to curse. Then she said that cursing was bad, so Aatrox replied while folding her arms across her chest that it was okay because she was a demon. She added nervously that if it weren't for Violet's presence, she would have already slept in the same room with him. Violet's eyes widened in amazement, and she said she wouldn't allow that to happen as long as she was here. Aatrox stood up with a savage smile and asked her why she needed her permission. So Violet stood up in turn, holding her blade threateningly, confirming that she wouldn't allow this no matter what happened. After a few moments, the candle in the room went out, and a violent battle broke out between Aatrox and Violet. Each attacked the other fiercely. Violet jumped, trying to stab Aatrox with her dagger, but the latter countered with her claws. Then Violet rushed with a double attack using her feet, and the 2 exchanged a stream of blows in different forms. After a few moments, Violet tried to kick her, while Aatrox tried to hit her with her fist, so Violet's foot collided with Aatrox's fist with tremendous force. Violet and Aatrox exchanged glances, and on Violet's face was a scratch with blood flowing from it, while Aatrox's body was filled with several other scratches. Aatrox smiled, a savage smile, while staring directly at her opponent. After a few moments, the wall in the room began to collapse from the intensity of the violent fighting, and couldn't withstand this stormy clash. Stone fragments fell to the ground. Then Aatrox and Violet stood facing each other, taking fighting positions, each ready to deliver the next blow. But suddenly, their concentration was broken by loud screaming from the side. They turned to see a man wearing a pig costume for role-playing, with a metal chain hanging around his neck from which a clear lock dangled. He pointed his finger at them angrily and asked them sharply what they were doing here. On the bed next to him was a girl wearing a cat costume for role-playing, who burst out laughing loudly at the ridiculous situation that had occurred. Aatrox smiled cheerfully and shouted to them reassuringly that they wouldn't disturb them, but asked them to continue what they were doing. Violet covered her face with her hand from intense embarrassment and asked them for forgiveness, then added that they should respect their preferences. But while she was looking through her fingers, she glimpsed in the room she was looking into the presence of a bone and cloak on the bed, so she screamed, saying this was Louis's room. Immediately, she and Aatrox rushed into the torn room. Aatrox began searching the place with her eyes while screaming his name, Louis. Violet entered quickly, with her dagger raised ready to attack, and asked her worriedly what had happened to him. But Aatrox, while examining the place, noticed he wasn't there, so she wondered if he had gone out for a short walk. Violet answered her with a definitive no, which made Aatrox stare at her in amazement, then returned her gaze to the bed in fear, and shouted, calling Violet, saying this was Louis's bone and his cloak, the one that belonged to him until recently. Violet answered firmly that he wouldn't have gone anywhere without his cloak. Aatrox opened her arms nervously, while Violet said with a gloomy face that Louis had been kidnapped. They looked into each other's eyes with concentration. Then Aatrox asked her with extreme worry, was he really kidnapped? Violet answered with a grim face while staring ahead that the bone and cloak were in front of them, and this left no room for doubt. At the same time, under the night sky, a cart pulled by a single horse was moving through strange natural terrain, and inside it Louis was deep in sleep, lying peacefully. As for Violet and Aatrox, they were quickly approaching a massive skeleton of an ancient, monstrous creature. While they were running, Aatrox turned to Violet and asked her, with a voice carrying a mix of worry and seriousness, if she had any idea where Louis was now. Violet replied while continuing to run without stopping, then pointed ahead with her hand, saying, there. Aatrox looked in the direction Violet pointed with intense focus, so Violet explained to her that this was the central auction house. The place looked like an illuminated space inside a towering sandy cliff, rising above the treetops. They hurried toward it, so Aatrox asked her if this place was for trading goods. Violet answered that everything was sold there without exception, and added that no one tried to find out where or how these goods were obtained, whether by theft or blackmail. What mattered was the money. Then Aatrox asked if Louis had ended up in the auction. Violet answered her seriously while staring ahead that Louis might seem useless, but the world is full of eccentric madmen whose desires cannot be imagined. Then she added that she herself, despite being human, was now following a demoness. So what was strange about that? But her words weren't completed, as a huge arrow with a sharp metal head flew toward her head at tremendous speed. Aatrox looked with great amazement at the arrow flying directly toward Violet, and saw blood splattering from her side. She turned to her and saw that Violet had stopped the arrow with her bleeding hand, holding it with her palm extended to the side, blood flowing on her fingers while looking with determination. Violet asked sharply who they were, so two young men stood watching them from the side. One of them laughed a wide laugh on his face, then looked at her and said it was a surprise attack with precision forward, and said he couldn't believe she really managed to deflect the arrow from that distance. After that, they both looked forward and said at the same time that they were impressed with her. They were twins, known as X and TR. X asked his brother TR if he was also impressed with her, so TR smiled a wide smile with enthusiasm while staring at his brother, then asked him whether he was now talking about the girl with purple hair. And after that he repeated his question about whether he had also thought about her. Violet stared at them with wide eyes, while Aatrox's face showed a look full of bitterness, her eyebrows tightly knitted, so she asked in confusion, "And what about me?" X raised his hand up and said their mother advised them not to fight over women. TR put his hand on his head with an annoyed face, and said maybe the solution was to simply kill her. X supported his brother's idea with joy, and pulled two long swords from behind his back while screaming, "Exactly!" Then looked at Violet with bloody looks, saying they would simply kill her. As for TR, he raised his hand which had a small bow attached to it while smiling a wide smile and shouted that they were carrying out their mother's orders. With enthusiastic looks and tense faces, they introduced themselves confidently and asked Violet to remember their names, but they couldn't finish their words, as Violet moved with lightning speed and tore both their bodies with her blades, directing a huge number of deep wounds to them at once, causing them to drop their weapons in amazement, while blood flowed abundantly from their new wounds. Then Violet said with a face devoid of emotions that they should step forward. Aatrox approached one of the twins' bodies and put her foot on it, and asked her what she was doing, then said it would have been better to interrogate them. Violet frowned and said they were talking too much about unimportant matters. Aatrox remained standing next to the bodies of the two defeated brothers with a surprised look, then turned to Violet and said she agreed with her. After a short time they reached the entrance of a cave that was camouflaged with palm leaves. Near the entrance were two guards, one carrying a long spear, Relive. This entrance led to the Arcanus, which was the auction house. Inside the auction hall, the host was holding a microphone with a wide smile on his face. With his other hand, he tore a piece of cloth that was covering one of the exhibits, and said this item belonged to the famous dragon hunter. Then, he tore the cloth completely to reveal that the exhibit was old underwear belonging to the hero Dravik, which looked worn and torn, with a picture of a muscular rabbit on it. The host continued his speech, saying this hero wore this very underwear during his adventures. The audience in the hall began bidding on it. A man wearing glasses raised a wooden board bearing the number 2 announcing his bid. Then another man directly in front of him raised a wooden board bearing the number 10 with a confident look. After a while, a girl raised her hand with a wooden board bearing the number 20 while pressing her face in embarrassment. The host continued his talk with a wide smile, saying these underwear went through many hardships, then extended his hand forward and announced they were sold for 25 gold pieces, then shouted with joy congratulating the winning bidder. After selling the hero's underwear, the service staff brought new things to the platform. The host pointed with his hand to those items, then said in a loud voice that the time had come now for something everyone had been waiting for a long time. The host had a wide smile drawn on his face as he looked ahead, saying the last segment for today was. Then he removed the cloth from the thing, and with a triumphant expression on his face, said this segment was a picture of the most handsome young man named Louis. The painting, which was displayed for all viewers to see, depicted Louis naked from the upper half, covering his face with his hand. The host said this man had an incredible appearance, looking as if he was a gift from God. He told the audience that even monsters fell in love with him, despite the fact that he was a real scoundrel. Emotions overwhelmed the viewers who saw this picture. One of the men, with a sharp expression, looked nervously ahead. A young girl lost consciousness and put her hand on her forehead, and an elderly woman looked with her mouth wide open, with interest at the picture in front of her. The host approached another thing the cloth was hiding. He said that, however, it was too early to be amazed, and that the buyer of this painting would also get Louis's skeleton. After these words, with a sharp movement of his hand, He threw the cloth and revealed to the audience a skeleton crucified on a velvet stand. The host looked toward the audience with his mouth and eyes wide open, then looked at the skeleton with a confused look, and asked them if they wanted to make sure the skeleton really belonged to Louis. The host thought, with a tense expression on his face, that this was not possible. Describing them as fools, realizing it was just a random skeleton he had just brought from his tavern. Then he asked himself thoughtfully how they would verify if this was true. With a cunning look on his face, he turned his gaze to the side, realizing he would sell both the picture and the skeleton, thus doing two things at once. The host stood near the skeleton and said it was Louis' skeleton, and he guaranteed that, and after that, said this would help liven up the atmosphere in their home. After that, he laughed loudly, suggesting he might be dead, but he assured the audience that, nevertheless, he was now here before them. Many aristocratic-looking viewers, wearing completely different clothes, looked at the exhibits with interest. The host shouted at them that such an exhibit couldn't be bought anywhere else. After that, he announced that the sale of a special product would start at a price of 100 gold. While he was speaking, he put his index finger in front of his face. A voice was heard from inside the auction house saying he would give 300. At this time, Violet was approaching the door leading inside the auction house. At her feet were the defeated guards who had been guarding the entrance recently. Inside, the auction participants raised their wooden signs with different numbers, shouting that they were giving 800. Then another voice shouted that he was ready to pay 900. The host looked ahead with his eyes wide open, and said into the microphone that it was 900. Then he asked in confusion whether anyone was ready to nominate 1,000. When he asked about this, drops of sweat flowed on his face. The man who was completely hidden under the cloak and cover he was wearing raised the sign, indicating his bet. The host was filled with the emotions he was experiencing, and opened his mouth and eyes wide, and screamed that this was the highest price in history. Then he announced loudly that if there were no more willing people, the goods would go too. He didn't have time to finish his words because the door in the hall they were in suddenly exploded, cutting off his speech. He looked ahead in confusion. The auction house where the event was being held was filled with loud screaming. The host, looking ahead in surprise, extended his hand forward and asked what was happening. At the entrance where the door had been blown up a few moments before, Aatrox and Violet stood. Aatrox opened her mouth wide and addressed the people inside, describing them as vile creatures, and asked them where was Louis. Violet asked her not to curse, and after that noticed she was being rude. At that moment, there were two corpses of two defeated men lying in front of them. Aatrox angrily turned on Violet and screamed, reminding her that she was a bad demon. Violet looked at her with an amazed expression and didn't say anything in response. Then Aatrox angrily turned to the people inside and asked them if they had heard her. At this time, Violet looked toward the stage, then called out to Aatrox, drawing her attention. Then, Aatrox also looked toward the stage. Violet, looking at the skeleton that was crucified on the stand, Aatrox screamed loudly, "Louis." After that, she ran toward him at incredibly high speed, but someone wearing full armor and holding a large sword in his hand stood in her way. Aatrox made a slight movement with her hand, slicing his sword, and ran on. Shortly after, a large man with huge muscles carrying a massive flaming weapon in his hands jumped on her as he prepared to strike her. Aatrox turned her attention to him, but after a few moments, Violet's blade approached this weapon. Using her blade, she managed to hit the weapon, and thus began splitting it. The warrior who was carrying this weapon in his hands looked at Violet in confusion. After a few moments, the flaming weapon exploded and sent a wave of fire toward Violet, who was close to the center of the explosion. The auction participants screamed loudly, with terrified expressions on their faces as they fled from the explosion. Then one of the men asked if he had gotten rid of her. A young man with a frightened expression on his face asked him not to talk that way. At that moment, there was an elderly woman behind them leaning on a cane with an indifferent expression on her face. Violet was on fire and her clothes were dirty, and there were many fiery sparks around her. Aatrox said with a confident expression on her face, while smiling, that they are very strong. After that, she dusted off her chest and screamed loudly that they are, however, not stronger than her. After a few moments, Aatrox looked at Violet with an amazed expression and addressed her in confusion as a person. While looking at her in surprise, she said that her wounds. Violet, looking emotionlessly ahead with a damaged face and a burned hand that was holding a broken blade, asked Aatrox to focus on saving Louis. Violet looked confidently ahead and asked her not to let her guard down. Then she mentioned that in this place there were many nobles who came to buy goods, which means there are strong guards who came to protect them. When she said this, they saw that wizards and a monk and a knight and a retired imperial knight were standing in front of them before a crowd of terrified aristocrats, all of different strong ranks. Violet turned to Aatrox and called her Demon Queen. She pressed her hand to her eye and said that if she was worried about Louis, she had asked her to help her protect him, and after that she said, "Please." Aatrox looked at her with her eyes wide open and her eyebrows raised high. Then she asked why. Violet looked at her with an amazed expression. Aatrox raised her hair with her hand with a wide smile on her face and asked her to help her when she said this. She called her by name Violet for the first time. Aatrox walked with her eyes glowing as she clenched her hands forward, saying she would protect Louis. Then she noted that there was no choice left. They rushed simultaneously to attack while screaming that if they had the same goal, they would simply help each other. They furiously attacked those who were in their way. Using her magical energy and tremendous strength, Aatrox threw the large man several meters away. Violet sliced her blade up and down on the fighters who were blocking her. Then she opened her eyes wide and looked up. I saw that there was a large magic circle above her, formed by one of the wizards. This wizard unleashed a powerful lightning bolt from this magic circle that hit Violet. Then he looked ahead in confusion and said, "This couldn't be. How was it that in the place where he struck with lightning, there was nothing left?" The host asked them in amazement why they weren't hurt, while Aatrox and Violet looked at him with calm features, and told him that they only felt some tickling from his attacks. Then the host asked them if this was what they really wanted, and when he said that, he described them as thieves. He was dragging beside him a huge wooden hammer, confidently repeating that this was definitely what they were seeking. He approached the skeleton and announced that Louis was the main item in today's auction. Then he looked with a gloomy face at the skeleton and said that if this product started threatening his dear customers, then all he could do then was get rid of the product. He gripped the hammer handle tightly with both hands. Then with a sharp blow, the hammer came down on the skeleton crucified on the platform, and his bones flew in all directions and shattered into small fragments. The host appeared with an angry face, his eyes wide, and inside he was talking to himself, wondering, what do they think of my amazing performance? He thought that if he just ran away, his customers would never come back to him. And outside, the carriage was standing next to the auction hall. So a man approached it and asked why it hadn't moved yet. At that moment, the host was thinking that he had to make sure his customers would attract more buyers to him. The auction participants followed what happened with amazed faces. A girl put her hand over her mouth in fear, and the man sitting next to her grabbed his chest with wide eyes staring ahead. The host tightened his features, realizing that he now had a real image of Louis, as well as a fake skeleton. Then, Aatrox muttered through her teeth the name Louis, with a dark expression on her face. As soon as she uttered it, the clouds in the sky began to spin violently, forming a vortex around a giant glowing red ball that was high in the sky. The auction participants looked around them in amazement, while the whole place began to shake violently. One of the men looked at his feet in astonishment and asked, "Is this an earthquake?" While another man raised his head up and shouted, "The sky looks strange." At that moment, Aatrox was releasing a huge amount of dense magical energy, spreading her wings wide raised threateningly, and she shouted that she promised to return Louis to his original form, but she acknowledged at the same time that she had been too arrogant. Then she stepped forward with tears streaming down her cheeks, one of her eyes red and glowing and the other white and bright, speaking words devoid of any emotion except pain, declaring, "Today, everything will end. You will all die today." As soon as she spoke this, her whole body was engulfed in magical energy, and bright waves of energy and blazing flames flowed around her, making the whole atmosphere tremble from her power. In either case, it was certain that all those responsible for this matter would be annihilated. And from the intensity of anger, red bloody energy rose to the sky. And outside the auction, there was a pool of Type 2 on the ground because Gyrex, the guard of the Imperial Felton family known by the title The Storm, was unlucky enough to be stationed there, and of course he couldn't maintain his courage. At first, Gyrex thought he would be the hero, because despite his poverty, he possessed crushing power that qualified him to join the elite course at the magic school and rebuild his family. But now, before him, there was a power more crushing than his power. As for Aatrox, as the Demon Queen, she didn't care about his life at all. And fortunately, at the last moment, Violet stopped the girl, warning her that the building would collapse at this rate. In turn, Aatrox asked whether Violet was calm about the hero's death, but Violet told her that the hero didn't actually die and asked her to take a close look at Louis's bones. It seems that after becoming a skeleton, the hero gained the ability of super regeneration, an ability that far surpasses healing magic. And so, Aatrox stopped attacking because this meant that Louis was still alive. But while the auctioneer tried to sneak away escaping, Violet reminded him that as long as they wouldn't demolish the building, they could at least punish those responsible. The girl didn't waste any time eliminating not only the auction organizer, but all his guards as well. And because of this, that wizard who appeared earlier tried to attack with an electrical spell. But Violet was very angry for failing to live up to the hero's trust. Memories of her failures kept coming back to her mind. So, Violet decided to vent her anger in her own way until the hero regenerated, just like any real killer would do. Faced with this scene, Aatrox was a little surprised, as it was obvious that her companion was human, but she was radiating an aura more evil than a demon's aura during combat. For this reason, the queen realized that Violet hadn't shown everything she had in their previous fight. In fact, Aatrox found this state of rage frightening and admitted that she was unable to surpass it. However, the fact that she was afraid of a human, while she herself was the demon queen, angered her. In the end, while she was about to be attacked from behind, she remembered that she was a black dragon and was considered the strongest demon king. So, she simply released a little of her aura, which caused all the cowards to fly away, saying she couldn't lose. Although the girl's second horn hadn't regenerated yet, she thought there was no choice before her, and asked Violet in her mind to watch her, because she was the one who would save the hero first by destroying all those bastards. Then she screamed at them, demanding that they return Louis to her. In turn, Violet began to pay real attention to her companion, because in the previous battle and now, it was clear that the queen hadn't avoided any attack except fatal strikes. In this case, Violet felt confused, wondering whether the demon didn't fear death. She had sworn that she would risk her life for the hero, but she wasn't sure if she had the same determination as Aatrox. Anyway, the host named Dabara, who was shamefully dismissed from his service as a knight in the Empire due to corruption, picked up a knife from the ground and advanced from behind, saying that the girl would pay the price for ruining his auction with her death. And so, a stab actually occurred, and the short man was very proud of his performance. But all of that was in vain, because he was the one who fell to the ground. Violet thanked Aatrox in her mind, giving her credit for the strength she possessed to protect Louis. Suddenly, the girl's attention was stolen because of an aura that began to get out of control beside her. This aura was coming from Aatrox, who began screaming out of control. Violet worried that the queen couldn't control her powers, and in this way, the area would be destroyed, which is exactly what happened. Anyway, after a while the hero woke up very scared, and the two girls were excited to see him and asked him, "Are you awake now?" Louis seemed confused, and after looking around, he asked if everything was just a dream because he felt like he was somewhere else. Then, very cleverly, the two pretended not to understand while offering him a glass of water. And when the water fell to the ground because Louis was a skeleton, he responded to them, wondering why their faces looked like that, and inevitably asked if they had fought again. Despite their attempts to deny it, the hero couldn't think of anyone else who could smash the wall, and because of that, Aatrox admitted that she was the one who did it. But she explained it in her own way, saying that she couldn't control her strength, and that Violet tried to calm her down. And when asked about it by Louis, Violet agreed while being a little amazed. Later, while they were walking in the hallway, Aatrox commented that she felt sleepy, but Violet asked her why she lied. And without waiting, Violet clarified that she wouldn't look at her companion any better because of something like this. "You're still a dangerous person." But Aatrox didn't care about being scary, and simply threw something into Violet's hand, which turned out to be an ointment. That's because the demoness claims she doesn't like to live in debt. Then, Violet finally began to think that Aatrox might really be worried about her. Later in the same facility, our hero was warming himself with a cup of tea, stirring it with his finger while looking at himself in the mirror. Right after finishing, he placed the cup on the saucer, only to find his old leg on the table, making him realize that the two girls had lied about the dream. At that moment, looking at the girls' faces when he woke up, it was clear that both of them had protected him. Then he looked at himself and began thinking alone in the room that the two girls had been severely hurt because of him. Then he looked at his hands in silence. After that, Louis said that if he could restore his appearance, he would do it no matter what it cost, and things would be different. In the end, even though he didn't force anyone, the two girls volunteered to help, but so he wouldn't feel guilty. Louis reaffirmed his commitment to restoring his beauty, and he now realized how selfish he had been. At this moment, screaming was heard calling for the hero. He went to the window and saw Violet, saying that something terrible had happened. Sighing from exhaustion, the girl explained that Aatrox had suffered from severe fever all night and eventually lost control of her power. She had transformed into a black dragon, leaving Louis in disbelief. Obviously, the hero ran to help and asked Violet to take him to her, but he stumbled while jumping from the window and fell apart. Anyway, since he's now a skeleton, it's possible for him to run while carrying his head, and when he reassembled himself, he thought that transforming into a dragon is actually pretty awesome. Back to the frantic running, at some point, Violet warned that they were about to arrive. The closer they got, the more anxious Louis became to see the magnificent form of the demon queen. The boy even thought about flying around the area using Aatrox as a mount, and that getting his form back would be super easy. Then the hero hoped she would be waiting for him and introduced himself with an extremely excited smile, only to find 2 crying children. Suddenly, Louis found that Aatrox's true form was a small, mischievous dragon, and she had only caused trouble for a small sandcastle on the ground. So, Louis remained paralyzed in front of Aatrox. All his hopes were shattered. In the Demon King's castle, the little monsters couldn't believe what they saw, because standing before them was the former demon queen known as the Black Dragon. With an excited expression, she announced that she had come to reclaim her throne. Then, with powerful magic forming in the air, all the subjects tried to flee, but it was too late because Aatrox cast her spell faster than the demons could escape. At least that's what she thought was happening. Louis was standing behind her preparing to hit her, and with one flick to the back of her head, the girl fainted and the hero carried her back as fast as possible. Faced with this, 2 bald men were very confused to see a skeleton, and since Violet isn't the type to leave witnesses, she took on the task of knocking out the humans and then went after them. After all this running, the 3 later managed to reach a safer alley. The hero asked if the Demon Queen was awake, and she answered yes. With great concern, she asked if she had done anything wrong while unconscious, but the hero answered no. Then, unexpectedly, she became happy about being insulted for no reason. In fact, she started to think that the hero was the best. Anyway, Louis asked Aatrox to get up and immediately asked her what had happened to her body. Apparently, the queen had pushed herself too hard before her body had fully recovered. But this is something she thinks she can't tell the hero because she doesn't want to worry him. Rudely, the girl simply said she didn't know and that she woke up like this. As for being different from the dragon he expected, Aatrox also claimed that this was actually a good thing, because even if it wasn't exactly what the hero imagined, she was sure she would protect him. In turn, Louis grabbed her waist and lifted her easily while asking if it was really possible to do that in this form. The hero really appreciates her efforts to restore his body, but he thinks Aatrox needs to take better care of herself before worrying about him, which made her feel embarrassed. And he didn't stop there. Louis explained that the same applies to Violet. For some reason, the hero rubbed himself against Aatrox's cute form, praising her softness. Naturally, the girl felt so good that she fainted from shock in the hero's hands, and since she became very hot from embarrassment, the hero let her go before getting burned. But even while lying on the ground powerless, Aatrox gathered her last breath to crawl toward Violet and smile mockingly before finally fainting, leaving Violet angry. After a while, after leaving the city, the team passes through a wide field. Louis feels the refreshing breeze, but he asks why they're leaving now when the plan was to leave at night, wondering why they're in such a hurry, putting the 2 girls in a bind. In the end, they couldn't reveal that they were being chased by the village criminals, so they agree that they're simply excited to restore the hero's body, and Aatrox states that she already found what she needed in that city. So, despite his doubts, the hero runs happily, saying he's now 1 step away from restoring his appearance. As soon as Louis moves away, Aatrox calls Violet and thanks her for last night. Violet was surprised by this. Aatrox continued that it was impossible she didn't know what happened. Last night, when Aatrox was losing control and about to go into a rampage, it was Violet who stopped her. Besides, she's the one who took care of her all night, so she can't think she didn't know. Violet, in turn, asked the girl not to worry about it, because she doesn't want to cause unnecessary worry for the hero. And in the end, she states that the queen can do whatever she wants to her as long as it doesn't cause problems for Louis. And this is the warning the girl decides to leave for the demoness. Without wasting time, the hero tells Violet that he smells delicious food nearby, and while they talk about going to eat, Aatrox notices that Violet treats her coldly while being friendly with the hero, which annoys her again. A short time later, at a restaurant along the field road, the 3 sit at a table. Aatrox feels disappointed because she had to make a lost love doll, which is a childish stress relief piece to squeeze when under pressure. Meanwhile, Violet uses a sturdy hair bracelet that stretches to any size, then asks the hero how he felt. He in turn receives the only auction necklace and shame clothes, which also have good effects, but he didn't like them, so he threw everything aside, saying they were boring things. Fortunately, Violet manages to catch them and told him he can't do that. The girl explains that the journey they're about to start might be harder than they think. From weather to monsters and demons and even other humans, everything could get in their way. That's why, Violet said, the necklace the hero got will definitely help him. Anyway, the hero asks where the Demon Queen got all these things. Aatrox explains that she was wandering around when she suddenly saw something shiny and then stole it, making Louis think this might not be acceptable behavior. But regardless, Aatrox states that she doesn't care about stealing from evil demons, and since this action is aimed at restoring his beauty, the hero agrees, while Violet watches everything, slightly shocked. Shortly after, the 3 finish eating, and it seems Louis enjoyed it very much. But as they were leaving, an employee called out to the group and said they hadn't paid the bill yet. Out of habit or something like that, the hero was surprised. Then Louis gets very angry and says, why should he pay when he did them a favor by eating there? For a moment, Violet forgot that the hero never paid for his food in the past. But to solve the problem, the owner appeared, and when he heard from the employee that the customer didn't pay even after eating all this food, he got angry and concluded that these bastards had no money at all. Anyway, the night owner's son called out to the skeleton who is our hero, and said he doesn't really know what he is, but in case he has no money, he unexpectedly offered Louis to pay with his body, which Louis cheerfully accepted after thinking a little, since this was already his specialty. The moment people heard that, they felt worried, thinking the hero had gone crazy. As for Sun, he admits that the skeleton has confidence, and expects he won't leave the place today. But as soon as he finishes speaking, Sun is thrown into the air in an instant, smashing the ceiling. And obviously the one responsible for this is none other than Violet. The employee quickly screams, asking if her boss is okay. But even when trying to wake him up, he seems completely confused. Going back to the moment he grabbed the skeleton's shoulder, the purple-haired woman rushed forward with a punch. But the fact that the purple-haired woman did it confuses Sun, especially since Sun knows her name for some reason, which makes Violet wonder. Regardless of anything, Sun finally succeeds in remembering everything. A few years ago, since his family had been a lineage of knights for generations, Sun dreamed of becoming the strongest man in the world. It was one day while he was walking in a small rural village that he bumped into Violet. Annoyed by this, he called out to her, then grabbed her head, saying that when someone bumps into another person, they should apologize. Whether it was her fault or not, the man wasn't very friendly with the girl, so she simply taught him a lesson until he begged for mercy. Sun couldn't accept the fact that he lost to a woman, but the hardest thing to believe is that when Louis appeared, Violet immediately turned around and apologized. That man who controlled that strong woman with just one word became the person the knight wanted to emulate. That day, while dreaming of being strong, Sun tasted defeat for the first time. But the strong are drawn to the strong, so Sun inevitably fell in love with Mr. Louis and prepared to confess his feelings. That day, he greeted him and said it was his pleasure to meet him. Then, with a bouquet of flowers, he introduced himself as a holy knight and began saying everything that interested him. Since Violet was angry about the confession, Louis didn't need to do anything because she soon scared Sun away. And so, that day, his attempt to convey his feelings ended in failure. And so, time passed until the current moment when he became a head chef. Sun couldn't believe he was seeing Violet again. But at that moment, the knight also thinks with difficulty in believing the possibility that the person next to her is Mr. Louis. Sun is confused, wondering why he's wearing a cloak. But looking at someone as handsome as Louis, it might make sense. Seeing the strongest man again makes the knight's heart beat wildly. But at this moment, he's in a state of weakness and doesn't want to show this side to the hero. In fact, the hero won't remember him in the first place. But nevertheless, Sun decided to leave things as they are and told the group to leave. In the end, he needed to prepare for the busy lunchtime. Unexpectedly, before returning to the kitchen, a voice says he's happy to see him well, which amazed Sun. This voice belongs to our hero, who says he was worried about Sun's sudden disappearance, and it turns out he was living here. Louis also reveals that he read the letter left in the bouquet and praises not only the handwriting, but also the knight's cooking skills. In the end, he apologizes for what happened today, but offers to pay for the meal once Sun settles his business. Faced with this, the employee screams, wondering if the boss will really let these crazy people go, and screams louder when she notices that Sun isn't paying attention. But suddenly, tears begin to fall from the knight's eyes, and this escalates to uncontrollable crying because the strongest man still remembers him. The other customers are amazed that the knight used the term strongest to describe another man, but since the hero came disguised, accompanied by a beautiful woman, they assume he must be someone important, except for another person wearing a robe with his hood up, who remained silent throughout this whole time. After some time, the group arrives at the city of Frager, specifically at the adventurer testing site, where many people have already gathered. At this moment, a voice shouts at a warrior not to block the way, but even while trying to find this person, he doesn't see anyone because the one speaking was Aatrox in her miniature form. However, she still manages to clear the way for the hero to pass with a kick. Violet asks Louis why we're here, so Louis tells her he wants to take the adventurer test, then tells her he needs to earn money. But instead of participating in the test, the two girls claim they can get it for him. So the hero asks how exactly they'll earn it, but the solution the two offer is beating up humans while assuring that it's okay because Aatrox is an evil demon. Obviously, the hero worries about this illegal suggestion. Anyway, Despite being happy that they're thinking of doing this for him, Lewis remembers they're so broke they can't even pay for a meal. When he says he can't just stand by and let this happen, the two girls are moved. Again, the hero says he's here to take the test and receives instructions. However, both Aatrox and Violet manage to see the hero's handsome face for a moment. Because of that, with more enthusiasm than ever, they decide to register with Lewis. The next day, under heat so intense that even birds faint, the physical test for the first adventurer exam is conducted. In the stands, a woman cheers for someone who might be from her family. However, Aatrox plays a more enthusiastic role, shouting for Lewis to eliminate everyone, even though it's just a physical test. From afar, in that desert-like place, the hero's silhouette appears. Despite the difficult path, he continues running without losing hope, but his life will be taken from him soon when a specialist analyzes the adventurer exam results at his desk. Third place goes to some man and second to some unimportant woman, but as expected, first place goes to Violet and last place to our hero, making some people start mocking him. But to respond to them, he just makes a serious expression and claims with complete audacity that he was going easy on them. An hour earlier, the examiner for the final test appeared, introducing herself to everyone as Elman, a fairy ninja. Since Elman was known as the worst possible examiner due to her strictness, everyone was desperate. But anyway, they didn't even have time to worry, because the fairy immediately knocked down all the complainers by throwing some blades, as talking was completely forbidden during the exam. Meanwhile, Violet finds it very strange that something so thin managed to pierce the ground. Back to the test. The fairy announces it will be a simple task, where participants will try to survive her attacks until time runs out. While Violet and Lewis wait for the event to begin, Aatrox cheers for her friends. Then a period of silence begins when our hero stands before the examiner in the arena. He doesn't really know what to say, so Elman simply announces the start of the test. For some reason, she seems curious about something on the boy's clothes, but that was just an excuse to make him bend down so she could attack him without him noticing. So, while our hero falls due to her strategy, she gets excited, and when he turns to look, an explosion occurs. A warrior shouts in turn that the examiner should fight fairly, but the fairy confirms that an adventurer must always be alert, so she asks for the next person to step forward. Unexpectedly for her, our hero was completely fine after her attack. Because of that, Elman becomes curious to know how he survived, since she didn't see anything. However, even our hero couldn't explain how he got out of that predicament, and that he didn't see anything, so he asked her if the girl was sure she attacked properly. But what the fairy understood was that Lewis was so arrogant that he judged her attacks as if they were nothing. Unable to bear this disregard any longer, she announces that this time she'll do her absolute best. Then Violet panics and Aatrox becomes more agitated, requiring her to be restrained so she won't interfere. So the fairy finishes her move and asks if the boy now sees the difference between them. But our hero remains completely oblivious and doesn't understand what difference she means. Elman asks how our hero managed to dodge the attacks without batting an eye since she was targeting vital areas. In the end, the reason the examiner's attacks didn't work was surprisingly simple. Elman is a ninja who fights by targeting blood vessels, but the hero is made entirely of bones. Therefore, her attack targeting pressure points is ineffective against someone who doesn't have any. In the eyes of the fairy who doesn't know this fact, Lewis seemed like an opponent beyond her level. In fact, he seemed like a terrifying monster she couldn't even dream of defeating. That's why, after falling to her knees, the examiner's resolve returned. Because facing something like this, she couldn't leave without neutralizing the danger. Both Aatrox and Violet immediately sense the girl's killing intent and scream for the hero to be careful. In an instant, a huge cloud of smoke appears due to the pressure of the attack. This pressure is so strong it knocks down the other participants, as if they were in a tornado. It seems her eyes have been consumed by power, and fortunately, the hero's companions stop her. Anyway, the Demon Queen comments that the fairy seems to be acting strangely. Indeed, after being overcome by a feeling of rage, she suddenly returns to her nature without understanding what's happening to her. After Lewis's exam, the examiner was replaced, and the other participants continued their tests. As a result, Lewis managed to pass in last place, but of course the two girls congratulate the hero, and he says it's nothing special. Anyway, Lewis says he'll get a mission from there, so he leaves the two alone while he goes to get it. So Violet enjoys the moment, but only until someone calls her name saying it's a pleasure to meet her. Suddenly, the director of the Paradise Guild named Felton appears, one of the four greats of the Empire, and based on the girl's performance, he decides to invite her to his guild. But at that moment, another person appears, saying it seems he's a bit late. This is Solid, master of the Solidus Guild, which is also one of the four greats of the Empire. Like his colleague, he wants to invite Violet to his group. Obviously, the two begin arguing to determine who arrived first. The fact that a beginner adventurer is receiving offers from two major guilds like these angers some of the other candidates. Anyway, even the subordinates start fighting, so the leaders ask which one Violet prefers, but to respond, all the girl asks is whether either of them knows how to restore a body to its nature, specifically the body of someone who is neither alive nor dead. In this case, the two begin thinking, but they admit they haven't heard of such a thing before. Therefore, Violet decides to reject the adventurer's offers. If this request cannot be fulfilled, the girl says it simply makes sense to follow the person she chose to serve. Meanwhile, our hero shouts, announcing he received a new mission. So, while the conversation atmosphere breaks a bit, Violet quickly says goodbye to them and runs happily with Aatrox toward our hero. In the end, the two adventurers think the request was just a creative way to reject the offer, but still, they remain curious to know who this man is, who holds greater value than them. For her part, Volcar thinks the man must possess power greater than brute force, because they witnessed it themselves. This girl is a guild leader, and with Mystic, they form the last two missing from the four greats. Felton in turn believes this type of power won't appear again, but since they can't be sure, they think Lewis might have somehow come back to life. In the ghoul dungeon of the area, several ghouls appear frightened because the one standing before them is our hero. However, what frightens them more isn't him, but the monsters walking beside him. At this moment, a ghoul stronger than the others appears and asks the rest to retreat. Very annoyed that his subordinates can't handle three intruders, the Ghoul King asks who the hero is to invade their territory, but the moment he pays closer attention, it seems the two recognize each other. When our hero first awakened as a skeleton, this was one of the ghouls he faced. So our hero begins to tremble, making Violet worried. Then, thinking this is cowardly behavior, V mocks him, asking if the skeleton remembers the old days. But before he finishes speaking, he receives a powerful blow to his face with a wooden club. It's so powerful that it not only breaks the weapon but sends the king flying through the air, unbelieving what's happening. In the end, instead of being afraid like last time, Lewis confirms he's grateful to be able to meet this scoundrel again. The ghouls watch what's happening before them, unbelieving. Meanwhile, Aatrox seems excited, and Violet very focused. That's because V, who was supposed to be the strongest among the ghouls, is being beaten one-sidedly. Even while begging Lewis to stop, the hero continues without any mercy, just as they did to him. After some time of venting all the suffering he endured in the past, the king falls to the ground completely defeated. So V wonders in his mind if this damned skeleton is the same one he knew, because for some reason, he seems completely different from before. Faye struggles to get up and asks if our hero isn't afraid of him. In his opinion, fear should be deeply carved into Lewis's memory, but the answer Faye receives is a piece of wood thrown at his head. To complete the scene, the hero says there's no reason to fear a small insect like him. To explain better, Lewis tells the ghoul to look behind him. There are two people thousands of times more terrifying than Faye, so there's absolutely no reason to be afraid. Furthermore, Lewis mentions that he's no longer the same skeleton that Faye used to beat up. In this case, the king screams, saying that Lewis is too arrogant just because he has support. However, the two girls he's talking about react with terrifying expressions, and this makes Faye realize that despite his anger, he needs to restrain himself to stay alive. So, Faye waves with extreme friendliness and admits his defeat with a smile. But our hero interrupts this strange announcement from the monster and picks up the club again, saying he won't let the ghoul go just because he's trying to act nice. So he warns him that it's not over yet, and tells the monster to get ready. He also clarifies that if he tries to escape, his bones will be broken. Later on, the team raises their toast with good drinks. The two girls praise the hero's good work. Lewis comments in turn that if they want anything else, they can ask freely. So Violet asked the hero if he was sure, and he answered yes. To clarify, Violet said she was talking about the ghoul who was left alive and might want revenge, should they go finish him off completely. Thinking about something like this made the hero think about it seriously. Since this ghoul had hurt the hero before, they returned the next day to eliminate him. The ghoul begged with all his might to stay alive, saying he would become the hero's loyal dog. So Lewis analyzed how much the ghoul wanted to live, and got a bit lost in thought. Since he had already gotten his revenge, our hero said it was fine because he had also gotten his reward. When he asked Violet for her opinion on the matter, she agreed proudly. Later, at dinner time, Aatrox spears a piece of meat with her fork and tries to offer it to the hero's mouth. But before she does that, Violet snatches the piece of food, considering the demon's action rude, because from her point of view, doing anything that might disturb the hero is very bad. Aatrox gets angry and says Violet makes doing anything difficult. The girl grips her fork more tightly. As Violet continues to annoy her, the queen asks her if she wants to die. In response, Violet grabs a knife and says she'll only say this once to Aatrox, to sit down and not do anything that bothers Lewis. Since he knows them well, Lewis is really bothered by their fighting. Violet quickly returns to her nature and offers him a drink, and Aatrox does the same thing. This leads to the two competing again for a place with Lewis. Violet yells at Aatrox to stop, but the demon responds in kind. So, inevitably, the two girls start fighting while Lewis drinks at the table. From another table, a man asks his companion if he should go stop the chaos, but the companion says it's natural for drunk people to fight. Additionally, from the sound, the bald man can tell they're fighting over a man. Violet is pure, with a beautiful smile, and Aatrox looks very nice too. Considering they're fighting over this man who drinks alone without caring, the only conclusion the bald man can draw is that this is the confidence of someone who has everything. However, the guildmaster of Lone Sky named Musal gets a bit annoyed. Later, still in the tavern, most of the food plates were already empty. Our hero, who enjoyed himself a lot, thinks he should order another drink since what they had ran out. But at this moment, the men from the Lone Sky Guild see an opportunity to talk to Lewis and tell him to leave. However, being under the influence of alcohol, the boy asks what they mean by nothing. Clearly, the adventurers interpreted this sentence as if the hero was insulting them and considering them trivial. So, one of the followers breaks a bottle on Lewis's head. For some reason, Lewis thinks the man is talking about the leader's baldness. That's why Lewis falls to the ground, feeling some pain in his head, but he also smiles, saying the men seem better than he expected. After the hit, the hero gets up a little and asks if the ugly bald man in front of him doesn't know how to take care of children properly. Both the word ugly and the word bald cause huge shock to the followers. That was a sensitive topic for Musal, since their era was an era of hair loss. So after the insult became intentional, the bald man orders his followers to beat Lewis to death. However, all the hero does is laugh at the situation. Then he asks if you think you can do that, and he's still laughing, asking if the two girls heard what the men just said. But when he realizes, he's surprised, because unfortunately for him, they were almost asleep from drinking. So with no one to defend him, the followers did exactly what they said they would do. The next morning, Violet and Aatrox, who somehow managed to get to their room, began to wake up, their heads still spinning. Given that, the hero asks if they've already woken up. Then Aatrox asks what happened earlier, and the boy explains that he brought them back when they dozed off. They both apologize for causing trouble, and the hero says it's okay. But when he removes his head covering to invite them to eat, his face is covered with bruises to the girls' surprise. Obviously, the two girls panic, wanting to know what happened to the hero. Since it's very embarrassing to admit that the great Lewis got beaten up in the tavern, he claims he simply tripped over something in the street. So he also changes the subject, asking them to shower so they can eat. But Violet is sure this isn't just an injury from a fall. At that moment, Aatrox releases a burst of energy, returning to her original form. She thinks Lewis is hiding the truth, trying not to reveal who hurt him. However, even in this terrible situation, she remembers that at some point, an order was issued to expel the hero. For the demon, it becomes clear that the culprits are yesterday's men, and obviously she went out for revenge for everything they did to her beloved. Violet in turn remembers that she asked them not to do anything against the hero. Then she asks Aatrox how the girl can say that after seeing him in this state. Violet actually answers that she'll also go with the demon, especially because anyone who hurts the hero deserves punishment, so they can't do something like this for the rest of their lives. And this is definitely something the Queen strongly agrees with. Later, at the Lone Sky Guild shelter located on a mountaintop, one of the men seems very bored given they have an extremely annoying prisoner. Anyway, the same man warns that they have visitors, so the boss asks them to come back later. However, since he knows Musal, the follower tells him it was a beautiful girl, and because of that, they allowed the hero's partners to enter. The boss in turn remembers that this is the girl who was with the weak man from the previous day, so he asks how she found this place, and praises the fact that she brought a beautiful friend with her. Anyway, Musal approaches with his knife, asking if they're here for revenge, if they're worried about the weak one. He suggests that men like them are much better than those types. In this case, Violet gently touches the adventurer's hand and asks if this is the hand he hit the hero with. Then he answers somewhat confused, confirming it. So Violet understands and with just one movement, sends the arm that did that flying through the air. It was such a quick movement that the bald man didn't understand for a moment and only starts feeling pain after falling to the ground, making the followers panic. Violet explains that if the man tried to pick the flower, she would have punished the hand, and if he tried to step on it, she would have punished the foot. So, with a terrifying expression, she asks how the adventurer intends to damage her flower. Musal trembles with fear, calling his followers to attack Violet, and although they're also afraid, they attack, hoping they can do something. Meanwhile, the hero stops in the dining hall to eat. Even now, he complains about the pain, not understanding why they hit his face when he asked them not to. Anyway, at that moment, Aatrox enters the place, announcing she's back. The hero asks her where she went. Then the girl answers that she brought something that can bring money, and asks this thing to greet the hero. Lewis, in turn, asks who this fat uncle is. The man gets angry and screams, asking if the boy knows who he is. However, because of this scream, Aatrox gets angrier and says that if he doesn't want to die, he'd better speak respectfully to Lewis, which the man understands. Anyway, the hero asks the two to come eat, and if the fat man is also hungry, Lewis invites him too. Of course, the man refuses because he was called that, but his stomach growls, and inevitably, he decides to put his pride aside. So the four begin eating in a very friendly atmosphere. However, at a certain moment, the man wonders what's happening there. Those who kidnapped him weren't weak, so dealing with them without injuries was incredible. Furthermore, the two girls didn't seem like the type to follow someone given their completely different personalities. But regardless, somehow they were now sitting at the table like good girls. Controlling them with money and power must be impossible, so taking this fact into account, the man thinks there must be only one option. To the hero's surprise, the man bows at the table and introduces himself as Dialock. The man explains that he was the Lord of Rebel Village until recently. He also mentions that there's no possibility of anything under that robe other than incredible beauty, so he asked Lewis how he knew that. Dialock clarifies that attention to detail is what made him a lord, and he had already expected he was right. Believing he's talking to Lewis, the man says he admires him and tells him he has a daughter with beauty enough to attract a line of suitors. For this, Dialock asks if Lewis is thinking of marrying her, but the real surprise is that Lewis immediately agrees, leaving Violet and Aatrox in shock. Before anything else, Dialock alerts that there's a condition for allowing the marriage, clarifying that marrying a princess isn't that simple. But upon hearing this, the hero says he no longer wants to marry. Naturally, the man panics and asks why. His daughter is incredibly beautiful. The hero responds that he's too busy to discuss conditions and knows that every daughter is beautiful in her father's eyes. Dialock couldn't believe he was refusing to marry his daughter just because he was busy, so he decided to use a more direct approach and asked the hero if he was looking for something. This made the hero wonder how the man knew that. The Lord responds that he must always be observant. Anyway, Dialock admits he doesn't know what the boy is looking for, but he guarantees he'll help him. However, since the Lord doesn't even know what the hero wants, it would be difficult. But if the hero is just looking for something he lost, Dialock thinks that's a waste of time. For this reason, he simply asks the boy to save Reblin Village for him, and if he does that, he'll get a great treasure. After a while, in a mountainous area, a cart passes by driven by a man with his horse. Inside, the four who were eating together can be seen. First, Diluc asked about Aatrox's gentle appearance since the goal is to rescue the village, but if the man was too enthusiastic, the queen suggests he attack her to see what she's capable of. Violet changed the subject, saying she would accept the hero's decision, but she wonders how Diluc will help them, explaining that if he's lying, he'll be in big trouble, making him tremble a little, even though he's a lord. Diluc begins explaining about the treasure and asks the girl to put the knife aside. The man explains that to help find the treasure, there was a map, and that his ancestors, who were tired of war, dreamed of a peaceful life. Thus, through this same map, they discovered the village of Riblin during an expedition. It was a place that wouldn't flood even during a flood. With good sunlight and wind, they achieved great abundance through farming. For a long time, the village was surrounded by rocks, so it was easy to prepare for enemy attacks. This was until this peaceful village began to be threatened by that man. Naturally, the hero asks who this person is, and Diluc explains that he's someone who sees human lives as insects. But fortunately, the man can take the hero because he thought marrying his daughter to him would protect the village. But at that moment, the two girls threaten him, where it becomes clear that Diluc was trying to manipulate Louis, saying he has no choice while being attacked. The Lord screams that the village is the most precious place he has, precious enough to make him marry his daughter to a man he just met. So, after hearing his honesty, the hero asks the Lord not to worry, because as long as he can find what he needs, he'll do everything in his power, so don't break your promise. Thus, after more time traveling, the group arrives at Ribble Village. As soon as they arrive, the first thing they do is get something to eat. Since it's so delicious, they all agree to eat more. So, they continue walking as if they're on vacation, and the Lord, who was left behind after getting tired of chasing them, feels somewhat disappointed that they're acting so carelessly. But he decides to go with the flow and relax a little too. While walking, someone comments on a commotion regarding the princess. Akali, who is a merchant, mentions that the festival was held with the goal of marrying off the princess. So, the first man comments that the village's future looks bright, but the truth was that the princess's standards were so high that no one could reach them. Many men confessed their love to her, but they were all rejected because of their appearance. Anyway, the current prince is tall and handsome, so both hope things will go well. In this case, the hero hopes the princess doesn't have the same face as her father, but Diluc assures him that he was handsome too when he was young. Suddenly, their conversation is interrupted by someone bumping into two other people. Continuing to run, he soon bumps into the town lord as well, causing them both to fall to the ground. Faced with this situation, the hero offers to help the man get up, which he accepts. As for the other man, he violently refuses help from his subordinates. This is the prince of the kingdom of Omelis named Sabom. The reason he's acting like this is that he was rejected and rumors had already spread among the citizens. Saibo, who always heard praise for his beauty, was described as ugly. To vent his anger, he grabbed Diluc by the neck, wondering why he bumped into him. Fortunately, the hero appears to defend the lord. Since the prince was the one who bumped into them first, he asks him to apologize, calling him an ugly bastard. Because an unknown person put his hands on the prince, the subordinates drew their weapons. But this time, the girls of the hero's group were alert, and with their meat skewers, subdued the guards. Saibo had never been called ugly twice in one day before. So, feeling insulted and with unnatural anger, he grabbed his weapon to finish off Lewis. But at that moment, someone threw a shoe that immediately hit the man's face, making him fall to the ground unconscious, as his subordinates rushed to him. Shortly after, someone breaks the silence, commenting that they were upset by the rejection, and came out to see how Sibo was doing. But Princess Ribble, named Cecily, didn't expect that Prince Omelis was intimidating her father. The fact that the princess refers to her father reveals to everyone, to their surprise, that the lord had returned. Then, Sabo feels confused, wondering if he's really his future father-in-law. But right when he says that, the princess gets angry, because even though he was rejected, the young man grabbed Diluc by his collar and threatened to kill him. Of course, Saibo tries to explain, saying it was a misunderstanding and that he didn't know he was her father. But in response to that, the girl asks him if his father, who is still in the kingdom, would believe that. Anyway, for the prince's image, she says she'll keep this secret, but only if Saibo immediately returns to the kingdom he came from. After a while, in Ribble Castle, the princess screams asking what happened to her father, especially since, even though it doesn't seem like it, he lost so much weight that she almost didn't recognize him. Knowing Diluc, the girl becomes very emotional. The lord in turn says he can't give all the details, but the girl understands that he has his reasons. By the way, Diluc says he has someone he'd like to introduce to Cecily. This person's name is Louis, someone even the lord admits is handsome and who was about to be the man she would marry not too long ago. Logically, the girl asks what her father is talking about, but since the hero has already refused, he asks her not to worry. Sissy in turn gets angry, so Diluc asks her not to take it personally. While Louis' group girls boil with anger, Sissy thinks about why her father suggested marriage, because she knows his preferences. So, she wonders if the hero might be her dream man. Changing the subject, her father asks Louis if he regrets not marrying now that he's met the princess. The hero thinks for a while, causing great anticipation, but he soon answers that he didn't like her much because she resembles the lord too much, which pleased the others. Perhaps for the first time, Cecily feels what it means to be rejected directly. She says the hero is smart and thinks he refused strategically at first. She asks Louis to take off his cloak. After all, if he's really handsome, the two can get married. Louis doesn't like being pressured and reaffirms that he doesn't care about her, so he asks not to be bothered. Calling her father ugly and speaking informally with the princess is enough to provoke her. So, the girl orders her subordinates to take down this man, but all this was still part of her strategy to make the hero take off his cloak, which unfortunately didn't work for her, as in a moment, the two guards she sent were shocked into the wall. Beside them, Violet states that the princess won't be able to touch Louis and the hero agrees. Since the two guards she sent were the best in the village, Cecily feels somewhat intimidated, wondering who these people are. To make matters worse, the girl's father screams, wondering what she thinks she's doing. Diluc feels very disappointed that his daughter treated the guest he brought in such a bad way. To make things clear, he immediately apologizes to the hero, who accepts his apology without any problem. When the guest seems surprised, the lord announces that they'll stop here for today. With all insult, the princess leaves with her guards, but before she crosses the door, the girl at least congratulates her father on returning home safely. Then she goes away and Diluc quickly puts his hands on his face, making Louis ask him what's wrong. Contrary to how it seems, the man quickly stands up saying he's perfectly fine. Finally, before the hero leaves, there's a place he must visit. Since he has to do it, he suggests the boy take a look at the village, and since he has nothing else to do, the hero naturally accepts. The next day, everyone notices the weather is wonderful. Besides that, our hero Louis is in a very good mood because the skewer is delicious. That's why he asks why the princess follows him like a fly in soup. Since she's a princess, Louis really wants to know if she doesn't have something better to do. After thinking for a moment, the girl remembers that the hero might be her dream man. That's why she backs down a little, saying she's doing it because he might be a dangerous person. In this case, the hero tells her to take her freedom as long as she keeps her distance. So, the girl gets angry and asks if the boy really sees her as a fly chasing soup, but her foot hits a rock on the ground. She loses her balance and naturally starts falling. Luckily for her, Cecily falls toward the hero like in a romantic movie, but instead of catching her, what our hero does is step aside, leaving her to fall to the ground. Instead of asking if she's okay, Louis reminds her of what he said about keeping distance between them and that she almost hurt him. Being very annoyed by everything, Sissy asks if this is what you say to someone who just fell. Then the hero puts a cloth on the girl's bleeding nose and explains that this is why he told her not to follow him. For the hero, the girl is too clumsy for an adult woman, so he leaves the handkerchief with her and asks her again to stop chasing him because it's already becoming annoying. At the end of that conversation, the guards ask if the princess is okay, but all she was thinking about is how every man she's met so far was fake and full of pretense, only showing their polished side. On the other hand, despite the hero's rude manner, his straightforward behavior was definitely something that made Sissy more and more curious. That's why she didn't listen to the boy's advice and decided to continue following the group shortly after. Looking at the entire scene in the middle of the city, the citizens got angry and wanted to know who the cloaked man was who spoke casually with the princess. Suddenly, someone thought of a good reason for Sissy following him. Then he quickly decided to share his conclusion with others. The princess had always been obsessed with handsome men to a ridiculous extent. The village inhabitants concluded that her following someone like this could only mean that the man under the cloak was incredibly handsome. Naturally, as time passes, night falls, and the princess returns to her room in the castle, complaining a lot about not being able to see Louis under the cloak, even after following him all day, especially since she still feels curious to know if the boy is really handsome. To satisfy her curiosity, Sissy asks her maid about the rumors regarding the hero, but what the maid tells her is that, according to the rumors, for her pride, Sissy interrupts her saying he's an ugly person, but her maid continues that Louis is actually an incredibly handsome man. After hearing that, the princess remembers that wherever she went, people were following her. But at a certain point, even the citizens began to recognize the hero. For the rumors to be strong enough to reach the princess's ears, her heart beats faster than ever, because for the first time, Sissy thinks she'll meet someone truly handsome. Meanwhile, from somewhere, our hero feels an itch in his ear and concludes that someone must be talking about him. The next morning, everyone is worried because there's only one skewer left. So, the kiosk vendor has to apologize to his customers. Louis in turn asks if someone had bought some before them because the first thing they did when they woke up was come here directly. With some hesitation, the vendor decides to explain. It was a fact that despite everything, the group had already eaten many skewers, but for some reason lately, cockatrice monsters hadn't been showing up around the village like they usually do. In this case, the hero suggests hunting some for the vendor, but he refuses strongly, wondering if Louis is trying to get himself killed. It's said that these monsters are usually hunted using traps, and that a live one is dangerous because it can release poisonous gas on others. So, while offering the last skewer, the vendor asks the boy to wait a bit because he guarantees that if they're lucky, they'll be able to catch one early the next day. Louis seems very thoughtful about everything that was said, and to the vendor's surprise, Louis declares that hearing that made him more excited to catch the monster. After all, if the stored skewers are this good quality, Louis is excited to try a freshly grilled one. Despite the vendor's warnings, the group sets off on another dangerous adventure, making the princess, who's watching everything from afar with a soldier, practically forced to follow them. After some time passes, and with evening approaching, the hero's group walks through a rocky field while Sissy follows them. The princess's guards want to know exactly where the cockatrices are because they really think there aren't any there. On the other hand, the hero can't see anything either, but Violet says they're in the right place. Suddenly, a knight's voice is heard suggesting that everyone should go back to the village now because it's gotten late. This is the leader of the rebel knights, Ning Harbing. Since the princess is also participating in this expedition, the commander comments that it will become dangerous when night falls. But despite Harbing's advice, the hero declares he won't go back. Moreover, he wonders why they're being tracked in the first place, saying that if they're just going to bother them, they should leave. The princess in turn tells Harbing that it's fine. However, the knight didn't want to tolerate such disrespect, and therefore drew his sword to finish the hero with an attack. At least that's what he would have done theoretically, but at the last second, Harbing stopped. Since the boy didn't move even a millimeter, the knight asked if Louis had noticed that he hadn't actually intended to hit him. Just the wind from Harbing's movement makes the trees around them get cut. However, the truth was that Louis hadn't noticed anything and was actually terrified. Anyway, Harbing comments that he heard about the hero defeating some of his men during his absence. Then he said he forgave Louis out of knightly mercy and advises him to act respectfully toward the princess from now on. He also explains that the next time he's disrespectful, he'll die. But before Harbing even noticed, suddenly the two girls from the hero group subdued him. He was amazed by their speed. Violet said she had restrained herself a lot until now, and asks if the knight is testing her limits. It all started with a marriage proposal for Lord Louis from Deloc, but when the boy was introduced to Sissy, that same princess tried to kill him, and now even Harbing, who was the knight's commander, dared to point his sword toward Louis. For this reason, although Violet really wanted to cut them all up, the knight's punishment is a perfect kick from Aatrox to his face, done out of flower mercy. As for the rest, Violet grabbed her sword and split the ground, creating a terrifying windstorm. Thus, Violet warns the princess that no one has the right to treat the hero disrespectfully, and that flowers should only be admired with the eyes, clarifying that this was a kind of threat rather than a simple request, which scared Sissy a lot. After saying that, the two girls returned to check on the hero, leaving the princess alone. Quickly, Harbing plants his sword in the ground with conviction and asks for orders from Her Majesty. At first, the princess doesn't understand what it's about. Then, Harbing explains that insulting her means insulting the entire kingdom of Rebel. So, all Harbing asks for is an order from his superior, an order so they can fight for her honor to the death. Suddenly, a slap echoes throughout the forest. Harbing didn't know why, but he had just been slapped by Her Majesty. With tears in her eyes, Sissy expressed her anger, saying that if the knight talks about death again, she'll do it with her own hands. The princess was trembling because she didn't want to do that. So, Harbing was able to understand the girl's feelings and apologized. Going back to the hero's point of view, he says he's fine, but asks why Violet didn't protect him from the beginning. Aatrox in turn comments that she trusts in Louis' abilities, which leaves him confused. Although the hero seems as weak as a useless skeleton, the girl reminds him that he has extraordinary regeneration powers. So logically, Louis gets angry, but doesn't do anything because he knows he would lose. Anyway, the hero simply calls the two to return to searching when the ground starts shaking like in an earthquake. A short distance away, the guards shout to prepare for battle, and Harbing takes care of the princess. Knowing it was too late, Violet drew her weapon, and the group waited for the noise to reveal itself from the forest. First, small animals started coming out, almost dragging the hero with them. One of the royal guards was confused by this, but his colleague yelled at him to stay alert, especially with a huge gorilla suddenly appearing, with the same desperation that the other animals seemed to have. When Louis was ready to flee, Aatrox asked him to look closely. That gorilla, which seemed like the biggest threat, was crying, and from inside the forest, a huge tongue shot out, precise as a whip, until it reached the beast, piercing it like a skewer. It wasn't clear that the group had found the delicious animal they were looking for, but no one there expected the cockatrice's appearance to be this terrifying. Although the monster itself was scary, something else caught the soldiers' attention. Besides the first beast, there were other equally terrifying monsters. Cockatrices had always been known as solitary monsters. Therefore, it didn't make sense for so many of them to be in the same place. With almost instinctive action, Harbing screamed to protect the princess. Being the strongest guard, he faced the first monster on the front lines. The attack came quickly, and the knight commander was able to defend, but with great effort. The princess asked Harbing if he was okay. Regardless of his condition, the knight confirmed that he wouldn't let the monster take another step toward her. He adjusted his stance to perform his secret technique, his trump card. At the moment the monster approached, the technique the knight calls Beautiful Sword Strike appeared. The monster roared, trying to scare its opponent, but the knight responded with a more determined scream. Thus, Harbing emerged victorious, managing to strike the monster first. As soon as the monster fell to the ground, all the soldiers rushed to take advantage of the opportunity. Then, the cockatrice saw his entire life pass before his eyes. Some time ago, this monster was born into a good cockatrice family. He soon grew up and became a young adult, and like every young one, he was full of vitality. At a certain moment in his life, luck smiled on him, and he was blessed with a good partner whom he loved more than anything in the world. Everything went well until a special day came, when the monster decided to propose to his companion. But for some reason, the mutant chicken who had been his soulmate until now refused. The cockatrice collapsed to the ground, crying, wanting to know why he was rejected. All that time, they had gone hunting together and even shared worms. But what his former beloved said that day was that her old boyfriend wasn't paying attention because she had said over and over again that she was allergic to worms and that she was exhausted. So let's end this. And she left him crying on the seashore. All these memories came back as the soldiers' swords approached. The monster began suffering from an existential crisis, and the guards attacked him mercilessly, making them very excited that they could defeat a cockatrice. With all enthusiasm, they shouted that the princess could now rest, making Harbin so proud that he got Louis's attention to show how strong the rebel knights are. However, on the hero's side, all the other monsters in the pack had already been defeated. Harbin had to admit that Louis's group consists of real monsters. Now, the next stop would be the village. But the defeated monster suddenly reappeared, and from behind the princess released a thick cloud of poison. The gas made it impossible for the knight commander to see in front of him, and if it was difficult for someone well-trained like him, it was worse for Sissy, who accidentally inhaled some of it. However, while she was about to faint, a skeleton's feet crossed through the fog, and Louis's hands covered Sissy's mouth and nose while he gently asked her how she was. Heading directly toward the monster in front of him, the hero called to the monster. He wondered why it attacked the princess from behind like a coward. The princess who is useless, weak, and brings nothing but trouble. Louis says they call her a princess, but all she does is waste food, making Sissy feel increasingly uncomfortable. However, the hero stated that even monsters should have common sense, and wondered who allowed him to act so irresponsibly, and whether the monster thinks the world revolves around him. This was a sensitive point because it was exactly what his former girlfriend had said when she left him. That cockatrice's stress level exceeded all limits, and he rushed forward crying, saying that humans could never understand him. While running, all the monster was thinking about was that no one could understand his love, but as soon as his energy was completely exhausted, he finally collapsed, defeated. The guards quickly checked and confirmed that the monster had stopped breathing. Assuming this was his personal failure, the knight couldn't understand how Louis knew that the monster was on its last breath. Moreover, to control such power, he thinks this level of composure might be natural for someone like him. But now, Harbin has also become curious to know what kind of power someone like Louis possesses. While the hero was splashing some water on his face, Cecily appeared asking what he wanted. For some reason, the princess didn't understand that Louis had thrown himself into the poisonous gas to save her. And now as he thinks about it, the hero himself doesn't know why he wasn't affected. Maybe because he's a skeleton. Anyway, Cecily continues and says that because of Louis's actions, she'll grant him one wish. But the hero only responds by calling her rude. After all, when someone saves your life, you should say thank you, not ask what they want. So Louis asks the rude princess to listen carefully. From now on, to her surprise, he asks her to stay out of his business. And so, the group leaves, taking the monsters with them, while Louis says that's all he wants. After a few seconds, Cecily screams, claiming she never said she was interested in him, and extremely angry at all that confidence. She asks Harbin if she looks like someone interested in that crazy man, and she complains saying she's the most beautiful woman in the world and isn't interested in anyone, while the knight enjoys the scene. Back in the village, and because of the hero's huge hunt, dinner was served abundantly. Diluc was one of those who took the opportunity to eat a lot, but the girls in the hero's group asked him to stop making weird noises because they were ruining their appetite. Given that, Cecily's father wondered about the hero who was eating more desperately, but obviously for these women in love, any mistake Louis makes is actually a success. Getting back to important matters, the hero asked where Diluc had been all this time since he said he would go out briefly. Then the former lord said he went through hard times, and after a little struggle, he thanked his hero because thanks to him the village became as happy as it is now. And more than that, Diluc thanked Louis for saving his daughter's life, who is the one he cares about most. Since he was grateful to this extent, the hero asked to get the map, but Diluc said Louis would already own it when he inherits the village, which annoyed him a little, thinking the old man wouldn't hand it over. To explain, the former lord tried to clarify what the map was, but the hero started talking with the girls about food. So, in the end, Diluc gave up trying to talk to the hero, thinking it was a waste of time. While the feast was being held inside the village, outside a man called his master, announcing that he had made sure to prepare that as requested. And so, this master named Salim called his followers to head directly to Rebel Village, which he claims is rightfully his. In Reblin Castle, the hero and the two girls sat at a table, while Diluc asked them if they knew that there are no animals or monsters appearing around the village, and that the cockatrice monster never appeared near the village, and the hero agreed that he heard that too, remembering what the merchant told him. Then Diluc asked why you're asking, so Diluc remained silent for a moment, then said that animals have senses superior to humans, and mentioned that before rain, for example, birds get closer to the ground, and before earthquakes you find frogs migrating in groups. Violet figured it out, and Diluc supported her, saying that this means something dangerous is actually happening in the village, and continued that while he was outside in the past few days, he tried to discover the matter himself, but he couldn't solve the mystery. The hero was puzzled when he heard the word mystery. Then Diluc said they would arrive soon, so Louis asked him who he meant by them, and while telling them that he's the person he mentioned to them before, someone suddenly opened the door and it turned out to be Solemn, who in turn headed toward Diluc saying, "I'm back, brother," then hugged him and told him he doesn't know how much he missed him and that he feels relieved to see him alive. Then the hero and the two girls asked about what was happening and decided to clap for this emotional scene. And in another scene, Selim stood outside the castle, welcoming the village residents who were happy in turn that Lord Selim had returned. Then Louis asked Diluc if this is the person who threatens the village's peace, and Diluc answered positively. Louis thought he would be scary since people say he treats humans like insects. Then one of the magicians approached Selim and did some magic so Selim could speak to the people. Selim began his speech by thanking the people for gathering today, and that thanks to their care he was able to return to the village safely, and that he traveled to many cities and villages, but none of them is as happy as Reblin. And because he wants to protect this happy village, he decided to take the opportunity to announce that he decided to give up his position as lord and return it to its former holder, his brother Diluc. During this, Diluc was shocked, then stepped toward Selim and asked him what kind of conspiracy he was plotting, and Selim answered that he has no such intentions, and that he was only holding the position during his absence, and that the lord position was never mine. Then he bowed to Diluc, raising the crown, and said, "It was always your rightful position." All of the two girls and Louis were watching and not understanding what was happening, and decided to just clap again. During that scene, the people screamed that this is impossible, and one of the villagers said that because of your presence, Lord Salim, we were able to live a happy life, and another man screamed that Lord Selim gave his best, and that life became better under his care. Then they begged him to reconsider and not say such things again. Then Selim screamed and asked them, "Don't you really know anything? That the reason you live a good life is because Diluc runs a strong institution." He said that then started coughing blood from his mouth, so one of the guards rushed to him, but Selim stopped him and said that his body is in bad condition and he might die at any moment, and asked the villagers for one last request, which is to trust him. Then asked them, "Will you stay with me here in Reblin until the day I die?" And they answered while shedding tears, of course they would. Then their shouts rose that they will stay by his side and will never leave Reblin. During this, Louis spotted a strange person wearing a coat and looking suspicious, so Louis asked him, "What are you staring at, you bastard?" And that man turned around, leaving, and Louis asked him mockingly, "Are you scared?" Then, after a little time, Selim apologized to Louis and his group for that mess, then said to Louis that he hadn't seen him before, so, "Can I ask what's your relationship with my brother?" And while Louis was answering that he and the old man, Diluc rushed to him and interrupted him and said they are his personal guards. Salim said he heard Louis calling him old man, so Diluc told him that he's the one who asked him to call him like that. During this, the mysterious man with the robe was watching from afar. The two girls got angry at Diluc because he said they were his personal guards, so he begged them to just convince Selim of that. Then Selim told Louis while shaking his hand to take care of his brother, and Louis answered positively, but his manner didn't please the guards, who considered him rude, and asked him to show some respect or they would kill him, which made Aatrox get excited to start fighting, and when they were about to fight, one of them screamed to stop that. It's Cecily, and she asked them what's all this mess, then asked Violet why she's fighting again, and she answered that they drew their swords in front of Louis, so Night Harbing ordered them to lower their swords because they don't realize the importance of those guests, and they replied that they have no intentions to kill them. Then suddenly their swords shattered, and Harbing said what really worries him is their lives. The guard was terrified by that and didn't know when that happened. Then Harbing thanked and told him that the one he should thank is the princess because she's the one who saved their lives. Then Selim approached the princess and told her she was late, and she replied that she wasn't planning to come. Then her features became serious, and she asked him why he's making a mess by taking a position that belongs to someone else. Silence prevailed for a while. Then the princess left him, but he said he didn't think this would happen, and offered her to have food, but she didn't answer him, and went to Louis and asked him if he got hurt anywhere, and he replied that he's fine, then asked the two girls to go eat something, and the princess asked to join them, so he told her he's the one who will pay, and she asked him why you pay when we eat together, why don't we share? So he told her she's going with him and she's a princess, so she shouldn't pay anything. She was surprised by the answer and thanked him. And while they were moving, Louis asked the old man, should we show off and order something expensive to celebrate your return as lord? After that, that, Salim watched them as they left, then called one of his followers and asked him why the princess is following that man, and he replied that he thinks the princess likes him, so he told him he's wrong, and with angry features said that Cecily is worried about my health, and that's why she's getting close to that man to make sure he won't hurt me, then asked his follower if his words were wrong, and he answered while scared that he's absolutely right. Then he said there's no need for the princess to do that because he won't focus on that man. During this, an insect was passing by his foot, so he crushed it, and with crazy features, said he will eliminate him himself.